The Browns, they're putrid. They're the worst team in the NFL.
The season, the 2024 season is over.
Lamar Jackson can't win the playoffs. He'll win a third MVP, though, so that's great. Drew Sample is the most important piece of the Bengals offense next year.
Go Joe Burrow. He deserves to be MVP. I wish he was the Browns quarterback. Kind of mean that.
If you're looking for the most reactionary, silly, and unserious show on the internet, then you're home. Live from Hamilton, Ohio, it's Off the Bench by Chatterbox Sports on 1410 ESPN Radio.
Here we go. It's been a while since I've been around here. It almost reminds me of kind of those old Olympic cities, you know? You go back maybe 15, 20 years after they have the Olympics, and you start to look around and you think, man, this city hosted the Olympics? What's up with all the outdated stadiums and the dilapidated buildings? Well, it used to look nice. That's kind of how I feel about the office at this very moment. But nonetheless, this is Off the Bench presented by United Dairy Farmers. I'm Trace Fowler. And I got another OG in the house, Reid Mouse with me.
That's right.
Reid.
How's it going? I put in the...
Our microphones are working.
They are on. Everything's on. Everything's rocking. Here's what I will say is in the baseline crawl, instead of putting actual lines and stuff like that, I had you taking a shot at either The Office. Actually, I said taking a shot at the main Off the Bench crew at negative 450. So we did it in the first minutes. It was free money if you took that on the books, baby. But I'm excited. I texted you 3 days ago. I was like, hey, they're going to be out. Let's just talk some sports on Thursday. And you said, let's do it. Let's rock and roll. So that's what we're doing.
Let's do it. And transparently speaking, I've not been locked into sports like I have been in the past every single day. So my apologies if perhaps we're not talking about the most earthly topics of news, like perhaps the Muskies last night blowing a 16-point lead. I didn't want to really bring that up, but I did get led on to that because the group chat from time to time is relatively funny. We have some funny people that work here, and the Xavier Musketeers are up 16, and I seen a text that said, "Looks like the Muskies are going for are going to make the tournament," from a UC fan. I won't oust who it actually was.
It was Spur.
Yeah.
It was Spur.
So Spur sends the text and says, "Looks like the Muskies are going to make the tournament." And next thing you know, I turn the game on and it just slowly dwindles away. And then really kind of to insult to injury to the whole thing is you have a situation where, people like to maybe throw some money on games, perhaps, gamble. Responsibly, of course. If you have a gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER, 21 plus in Ohio. But point is, they said +8. +8 has no chance in overtime. So I thought, man, I hope this. I feel bad. People might not believe this, but I actually kind of half-heartedly sometimes root against the teams that some people like. And then there's times where if it starts to go, the thing is with me though, if it starts to go relatively bad, I somehow just reverse course and I'm like, I don't want it to be really bad because I live in that misery typically as a Reds fan, right? It's like I understand the pain that is. You think you have something, and then it completely goes away, which we'll get into on this show as well. We think that somebody should probably be fired,
That's right.
And we also will talk about the hiring of the new defensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals, Al Golden. So a lot to get to in this show. If we don't get to it all, then we'll probably find something else to talk about. And who knows where this show goes, to be quite frank, because I'm not totally sure. We're kind of like getting thrown to the wolves here a little bit, but at the same time, maybe the show will go better that we don't know what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, listen, we're not going to be on radio today, so
we're not on radio?
We're not on radio. We're not going to.
That's even better.
Right, yeah, you don't even have to worry about 15-minute breaks. We don't have to worry about cutting this thing up. We're just going to rock and roll for 2 hours and see where the wind takes us. We do have a couple things. I sympathize with what you're saying as a troll, because that's what I do. I troll Ohio State.
Yes, right.
troll
You come out
Reds
of the bridge,
fans
yes.
and all this stuff. It's a lot more fun to troll when the team that you're trolling is good. Because then you just feel like a bully if they're constantly bad. It's just wait, when I do my Reds thing, I prefer it to when you guys are on a 12-game win streak. So then I just look like a jackwagon who's just jealous the entire time, not to where I actually look like a bully, which I assume is what it felt like with the Muskies last night. You're like, man, I hope they really lose this game. Yes. Then they lost the game, and Kirby's losing money on the game, and you're just like,
yeah, you feel bad.
I feel bad. I feel bad.
It's almost like when your teams are doing well, or the teams that you surround yourself of, we have a kind of a plethora of teams. When they're doing well, it's almost like you're trying to humble the braggadocious kid at school. Mm-hmm. When you're knocking them down when they are losing a 16-point lead and or when perhaps the season is falling apart, you do feel like what is a bully. And maybe that's what you are. But speaking of bullies, it wouldn't be a sports talk show if we didn't talk about somebody getting fired.
That's right.
And in my opinion, I've been on this train for quite some time now, and I'm not suggesting for a single second that I know all of what happens behind the scenes at the University of Cincinnati. But I do know this. When you are in charge of an organization as a whole, as always, it starts at the top. You're either going to get a lot of credit for what happens or you're going to get a lot of blame. It happens in the NFL at quarterback, and Lamar Jackson is exhibit A of that example. You can play as well as you like. You can be as talented as you want to be. But if things don't go well for the organization that you are a part of, you are going to be held accountable. Which brings me to the athletic director at the University of Cincinnati. Now, everybody always wants to point fingers at coaches and say, hey, this guy needs to get let go, that guy needs to get let go. And very rarely in college athletics does the athletic director kind of become the main point of emphasis when it comes to what you would call a problem. More times than not, it's because they've hit a home run, if you want to call it that, on one hire, right? Mm-hmm. The problem at the University of Cincinnati is that you don't have the luxury at an institution like that to survive what I would call a relatively significant drought within programs. So, Ohio State football is going to have to be bad for a generation for them not to sell their stadium out. You're going to have to be bad for so long that it would almost seem impossible for that institution not to be able to figure it out. I don't believe Cincinnati's like that. In very much the same way that I view the Reds and the Big Red Machine and the glory days that were basically the dominance of the Cincinnati Reds. You can almost rest in those laurels. You can almost feel like that's the way it's always going to be. And I always wonder to myself, as you look at the University of Cincinnati and you think, how long does that last for the basketball program? How long do you get that leash of saying? And many people would agree with this. Even Xavier fans deep down might say, yeah, I mean, listen, as much as I don't like the University of Cincinnati and I don't like their basketball team, I can honestly respect the fact that they have some history there and they have kind of a pedigree to stand on of success. But as the years continue to go by and the tournaments continue to get missed, when does that go away? Because I would argue it feels like, and again, this is an outside perspective, it feels like we're going down that path. It feels like we're 2 or 3 tournaments missed away from the next freshman class entering into the University of Cincinnati. And they're not there to go to basketball games. They're not there to go to football games. They're going there largely because they want to go to a big school at a big city. And maybe you could argue that, it could get flipped right back on its head if you win some games, this, that, and the next. But I don't believe that we are closer to the glory days of, and you could say whatever you want about Bob Huggins, and I'm not trying to defend the man by a single second of saying this, but he had basketball at the University of Cincinnati at its highest peak that it's been in since I've been alive. And now the question remains is who's at fault for all of this? Because John Cunningham is a name that many people probably outside of the diehards of sports have no clue who he is. And that's okay. The question I have to you, and to you as well, Reid, is what is their responsibility? Is it strictly just fundraising? Is it strictly just going out and trying to find ways to get your institution in a better place? And one would argue you're the director of athletics, so you'd like to think that the teams would have to be successful. But maybe some don't believe that. Or is it strictly, hey, their job is to find coaches, hire coaches, and make sure those athletic programs are doing well academically. And I know they would never say this publicly, but more importantly, athletically, they're doing well. And you look at the Learfield Cup standings, and I've referenced this obviously on Twitter a few weeks ago, excuse me. And I know that might be something that people scoff at, right? It's like, oh, the Learfield, who cares about the Cup standings? Well, if you fail at hiring the football coach and you fail at hiring the basketball coach, you could make an argument that those are only 2 of, call it 12, 13, 14, 15 programs that they're in charge of. Now, we all know that those are the most important. Those are the ones that bring in the most money. which typically runs the world. But I guess the question is if all of those other programs aren't doing well either, then where actually is the issue? And perhaps it starts at the very, very top. Because I guess the question I have is we want to talk about how long Wes has left. Oh, Scott Satterfield, if he doesn't do well this year, is he got to go? How long does John Cunningham have left? He's the guy that, quite frankly, created this situation.
When I look at Cincinnati, it's so interesting because you were right when you said it really doesn't matter what you do in the other 14 sports that UC carries. If you knock out either the basketball or the football coach, like if you hit a home run higher with one of those two, who cares what the women's soccer? And I'm sorry to say that.
No, you're right.
I'm sorry to say that, but that's true. Like, who cares what's like if women's soccer's going winless every single year, you're not going to lose your job because you hired the home run football coach. And for a long time, Cincinnati not only continued to hire great coaches, like they didn't miss. Like, look at every football coach that has come through here. Brian Kelly, Butch Jones, and Tommy Tupperville. It didn't work, but that was, that's a swing, right? You're taking a guy that had success in the SEC and you're bringing him here. And then you get Luke Fickell, who was a one-year head coach, failed at Ohio State, but that was a big hire. Right. Then you go get Scott Satterfield, and on the day he was hired, you're just like, ugh.
Yes.
Same with basketball. You go Bob Huggins, you go Mick Cronin, back-to-back great coaches, right? Then you get John Brannon, the NKU coach. Ugh.
Right. It's almost like, you try to relatively outsmart the room. And I guess my thing with UC is, in the specific situation that they find themselves is sometimes in order to get out of tough spots, you got to make tough decisions. And I wonder to myself how long Wes Miller has, because the one thing that Wes Miller does have going for him is he's recruited very well. He has. He's recruited very well. Statistically, or whatever term you'd like to use, based off of 247 rankings, they have the most successful classes that they've ever had in the history of their program. But you backtrack, and then you got to ask yourself the question is that a product of where that program is because of the league that they play in now? Or is that a product of Wes Miller? And I would like to give Wes most of the credit, to be quite frank, because they've played in the Big East. They've been a part of bigger basketball brands. And I get the American wasn't very good, but at the end of the day, it's still UC athletics. And I think that holds still some weight. But the biggest point is that there's a stud coach, a star coach that's waiting to bounce back. I think back to all these people that got canned because something happened at their program. There was some turmoil. There's a guy named Kelvin Sampson. I don't know if you know him. Might be one of the best coaches in college basketball right now that got let go of a school because he was texting during a dead period. It's almost hilarious to look back at what some of these coaches got fired for because of the NCAA violations they had. You also then jump down into a situation, and you can say whatever you want about what's going down at Auburn, but Bruce Pearl, let's face it, kind of left in pretty bad taste the last time he was in NCAA. Got kind of let go, got let go, gets brought back. Everybody's like, oh, man, Auburn, they're desperate. I mean, they're desperate. Right. They're going and getting a coach that's got a really bad, pedigree of a stain on his resume. Well, I don't know. They're just number one in the country now. There's another guy out there like that right now. And I don't know who's going to get him, but somebody's going to get him. His name's Will Wade. He went to LSU, got canned, let go because he was paying players. Turns out that you weren't allowed to do that at the time. Now that's part of the deal. And I just wonder, a guy that can take McNeese State, I didn't stutter when I said that, McNeese State, and they're good. They are good. And now you have a situation where you're a team like UC or many other and I don't say mid-majors, but mid-level schools at big Power 5 programs, and you could say, UC's not mid-level. I hate to say this, but that's where they're at right now. They're a middle-of-the-pack best team in the Big 12. In order to get back to the top of the league, you're going to have to go find somebody that has the ability or a proven resume to do it, and Will Wade's that guy. I'm wondering who's going to hire him, and it's hard to give up on Wes now.
Yeah.
But if not now, when?
We are teetering closer to Wes not being the guy, but I'll say this about Wes. Unlike Satterfield and unlike John Brannon, Wes was a splashy hire. Like, there's no doubt. Like, people were excited for Wes Miller. He says the right things. He recruits well, and he had success. You know, obviously was a pretty good basketball player. He's got Roy Williams coming in the building, which doesn't equal wins, but it makes your program feel a little more relevant. So I think it's unique to not give up on Wes yet, but it's certainly teetering towards like, man, you gotta turn this around. I'm just talking about Cincinnati as a whole. I think last year, first year in the Big 12, they didn't have a single athletic program go above 500 in conference play.
Yes.
That's immediately reflected on your athletic director. And I don't know how you can go 3 if Wes Miller is a miss, which I don't think neither one of us are there yet.
No, not totally.
We're going close.
I would just say this. If Will Wade said he's willing to come to Cincinnati and I'm in his shoes, I'm in Cunningham's shoes, then maybe he can't. This is the weird situation with Cunningham is that Wes is his guy. He brought him in. It's kind of hard to go back to the administration, the powers that be, the president of the university, and say, hey, I think I might have messed up. I want to go get someone else. At some point, you keep going back to the boss and saying you ran out of money or you need something. They're going to eventually think that you're the problem, and Cunningham perhaps doesn't want to do this. But I'm telling you, if Will Wade at McNeese State said he wants to come and he'd be the head coach at University of Cincinnati, I have nothing against Wes. Wes could end up being a great coach. Right. But I know what I get in Will Wade. I've seen it with my own eyes. He took a program at LSU that was historically bad in the SEC.
Never good.
And then eventually, like within a couple years, you're immediately one of the best teams in the SEC. That's not by coincidence. You have a guy that obviously knows how to do it, and he goes to McNeese State, and then immediately they become like good enough to start beating some relative, I don't want to say major Division I teams, but that's what they did. And I'm not suggesting for a single second that I think Wes Miller's a terrible coach.
No.
I just think there's a time and a place, and desperate times calls for desperate measures, and Johnny Cunningham is at that desperate measure stage, in my opinion. Like, if Wes doesn't make the tournament, and Satterfield goes out there next year, and let's just say, and I know this sounds crazy, they don't win 9 games. And I know that sounds like a lot. What if they go 8-6? I don't care. I need to see drastic improvement. If I'm the leadership at UC, Cunningham's gone. Period.
I'll make a case for Cunningham here in a second, but I saw someone put this in the chat, and I think it's pretty interesting. You're saying if Will Wade, you make Will Wade an offer that he can't refuse because you're so convinced that he can turn it around and all that. If Will Wade takes this job, do you think he would leave UC for a bigger job if he's really successful? Like, do you think he would use it as another stepping stone, or because he's kind of damaged goods, he'd be here in the long haul?
No, I think here's what I would always say about the stepping stone thing that is the University of Cincinnati. Sometimes you're at a place that is always going to lend itself to the chance of someone else coming in and leaving.
Right.
If Notre Dame football, which I know we can all agree is kind of a laughable thing to say now that Marcus Freeman had them where he has them. Right. But if Notre Dame football can be perceived as a stepping stone for Brian Kelly, and I get they weren't really that, but it's always perception. It's always dependent upon coaches and what they want to do. Luke Fickell, if he had to do it over again, my guess is I hesitantly say this, he got paid. He went to Wisconsin. He got paid. He's probably going to get fired. Let's all be honest about that. He's going to get fired because he went to a place that's going to be difficult to win at in a league that's tough. And I guess, Luke Fickell, maybe he's seen the cupboard was very bare at University of Cincinnati, which we don't need to go down that path. But,
right.
There's something to be argued that Satterfield came into a horrible situation. But ultimately, if you go out and you hire a guy like Satterfield, you leave yourself no margin for error if they're not good. Mm-hmm. Which gets me into the next topic with the Cincinnati Bengals, if we're being completely honest.
I don't want to go there. I was going to make a case for John Cunningham real quick.
Go ahead. I don't think he has one.
The only thing
I'll
say is
Mr. Nice Guy.
Well, I'm just trying. As the athletic director, he did broker the deal that got them into the Big 12, and that's certainly worth something, right? Like, and I know that all these conferences were expanding, so maybe anybody could have done that. But he was the athletic director overseeing the deal that got them into a major conference. So, and other UC fans will point this out. He also brokered the deal to get the Jordan brand back. I don't know. Like, maybe that's not worth anything. It's certainly not worth anything on the floor. But maybe he's more politician than he is executive or talent acquisition. Maybe he's better at, getting the program, raising funds, raising NIL, or doing all that stuff, which that's part of the job of being athletic director. But it's pretty clear that he's pretty bad at hiring coaches for your marquee programs.
Yeah, and listen, I'm not downplaying NIL at institutions like the University of Cincinnati or anywhere else. There's always a level of relevance that you need to have in NIL just to have players in general. But I just look at the fact that if you're going to be at the University of Cincinnati, especially on the football side of things, you're going to be outmatched at all time. You're going to have to do more with less. You're going to have to moneyball, if you want to call it that, every single year in order to be at the national level. And the one thing that Luke Fickell did for the University of Cincinnati football program is he didn't do them a great service when he basically got them to the pinnacle. And some would say that's great, and it is great. But it also led to expectations now. There's expectations around Cincinnati to where if the football team doesn't win 10 games or they aren't a part of the, Big 12 championship type pedigree of a season, it's not going to be good enough. And I would argue that is going to be a damn high standard to make at the University of Cincinnati. And in order to be able to do that on a year in, year out basis, again, the Big 12's relatively weak at football, yes. But I just think that you're going to have to probably outsmart people when it comes to recruiting, which they're terrible at right now, if we're being honest. I don't know if you've looked at 247, but the University of Cincinnati football program's like last in the Big 12 for recruiting. Now, maybe they find diamonds in the rough. There's always the no-star players that end up becoming 5-star players on the field. But in general, it's not looking promising if you're a Cincinnati football fan. And I just don't think the way that I view it all, the fundraising aspect of it all, the brokering the deal to the Big 12, in my opinion, is more of an institution, school-led thing.
Right.
And it's also based off the history of your programs. Not saying John Cunningham had nothing to do with it, but I would argue that he had much less to do with it than what his real job is, which is to make sure that the teams that go out there that wear the Cincinnati across their chest win games. And the fact of the matter is that when you look at, again, people laugh at it, the Learfield Cup, which, if you don't know what the Learfield Cup is, it's a pretty basic standings, which goes off of how did your teams do in league play relative to the other teams that are in Division I, which is a pretty good metric to go off of, because at least when you play in league play, you're playing relatively the same size schools. Mm-hmm. So you're just going off of what are you doing with what you have. And they finished damn near dead last out of almost 300 teams. The proof's in the pudding. John Cunningham is on thin ice. And the truth also is Wes Miller is the only guy, in my opinion, that has a chance to save him. And it starts with them playing BYU in this next game and having to find a win, stack some wins together, get into the tournament. And guess what? In March, if they win a game in the tournament, no one's talking about any of this. But that's the margins that are in sports. Let's be honest.
Right.
Lou Anarumo 2 years ago was praised. Mm-hmm. Fast forward 2 years, he's fired. And now you have Al Golden.
It happens quickly. And the final thing I'll ask you about this UC before we dive in there, what does it say? You talked about expectations and where the expectations are of a football program. What does it say about, and I think most Bearcat fans would say that they hold basketball in higher esteem than their football program. What does it say about the expectations that UC Bearcat fans, I think Elliot said this, a Sweet 16 appearance for UC basketball is on par with, making the college football playoff that's, if you're a UC fan around my age, you've seen the Bearcats make one Sweet 16. That's where they want to go. Like, it's not like championship, Final Four, win the Big 12. It's simply, can we win 2 games in the tournament? What do you think that says about the state of the program at the current moment?
Like I said, I would argue that institutionally that's not the same. But from a fan base perspective, it probably is. I mean, if you asked or polled people that claim themselves to be Cincinnati fans, they would probably, if you told them you would give them three Sweet 16s and or farther over a 10-year stretch or one college football playoff appearance, they're gonna take the basketball, and maybe rightfully so. But the amount of money that Cincinnati got from making the college football playoff is significantly more than what would happen for the basketball team. So football is the driver financially at Cincinnati. But from an overall culture perspective around the fan base that exists within Cincinnati, basketball drives that. So you're in a unique situation as the athletic director at the University of Cincinnati, but you can't go for 2. You can't go for 2. You can be what you're worth in a way, right? When you're in the NFL, right? You can get away. If you're a star receiver, you can get away with a couple more penalties or off the field issues. But if you're the last man on the roster and you go out and again, you get in trouble with the law, you're going to probably get cut. And I guess I'm to the point now with John Cunningham is he's done nothing that makes me think he deserves grace. He does done nothing that makes me think, you know what? I know he swung and missed on Scott Satterfield, but he hired Luke Fickell, but he didn't do that. You know, I know he swung and missed on Wes Miller, but he hired John Cunningham, and he was a success. That wasn't the case. Now, John Cunningham, to be fair, was hired under Bond, but it was like a month before Bond left, and Cunningham was the next man. He was like the right-hand man. Right, so I'm not suggesting that he hired Brandon, but I'd like to think that he was probably part of the conversations considering he was a month into the idea of being the athletic director, a month away from being the athletic director. So, you know, again, how many people actually give a rat's tail about John Cunningham and whether or not he should be fired? I don't know. And perhaps our chat's screaming at us, telling us to talk about something else, and that's fine by me because the next topic is the Cincinnati Bengals. And you had asked the question in a group chat, I think, or maybe it was somewhere, of, you know, who has the most opportunity of success between all of the schools and pro teams that we have in this city. You run through the list right now. Obviously, you have Xavier basketball, you have UC football and basketball, you have the Reds, and you have the Bengals. I didn't include the Cyclones, and I didn't include FC Cincinnati because, to be quite frank, I'm not knowledgeable enough to know anything about those two proud professional organizations. But I think the Cincinnati Bengals are the clear, easy answer there. And maybe I'm wrong, but the NFL lends itself to giving an opportunity to being able to have a setback and bouncing back very, very quickly. And you watch the Cincinnati Bengals, and clearly and obviously the main culprit of not having success this past season was the defense. And yes, there were times where the defense stood up, and there were times where I felt like, you know, I thought that they rallied and they did a relatively good job. Towards the end of the season, they did do a better job. But the one thing I always laugh about when it comes to this, well, you know, Zach Taylor teams, they always finish strong. Yeah. And they have. And some would argue, would you like to finish strong or start early like the Steelers and then falter late? The truth is, if you want to be a championship team, look no farther than the ones that are always in the championships. They don't start anything. They just consistently do something over a long period of time. And as much as I complain about the Chiefs, and as much as I sit here and I say, oh, you know, I'm so sick and tired of the Chiefs, we can all agree, are very, very consistent and good. And I do think that, yes, not going to go down this rabbit hole right now, I do think they've been the beneficiary of some fortunate things that have gone their way. But they've always put themselves to be in that position, and I will admit that. It's kind of like watching Tiger Woods in his prime, and then all of a sudden you got a tie match going to the back nine. Sometimes it feels like the Chiefs get like what Tiger Woods would be like, oh, you know what, Tiger, we're going to give you a stroke, you know? I mean, you're already just as good as everyone else, but we're going to add just a little extra layer of help here just to see if perhaps they can overcome that too. But, you know, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm just saying it does always seem like perhaps they get the benefit of the doubt. But back to the Bengals, they have clearly made a decision to try to rectify the only thing that probably would stop them from being a Super Bowl contender, which is the defense. The question I have to you and Bengals fans is this just lipstick on a pig? And I'm not saying that's Al Golden's problem. I'm not saying he's the problem. I'm just saying, like, the age-old argument that I would have is how much defensive coordinators actually matter versus actually having good players.
So this is why you can talk yourself into Al Golden being a great hire, because I think you're right. 2 years ago, we loved Lou Anarumo. He was one of the DCs getting head coaching interviews. He obviously never got the head coaching job that he wanted, but he was just going through, and he was thought of very highly when he had, what's the phrase you always say? You can't win the Kentucky Derby with a donkey.
Correct.
And he had good players. The problem is in the NFL, you've got to constantly turn over your roster via salary cap. It's called the not-for-long league for a reason, because players come and go. They might only give you 2-3 good years, and then you got to continue to move. And Louis Anarumo never developed young talent. He never did. We drafted Dax Hill, we drafted Miles Murphy, and you could say maybe those are wrong guys, but when you continue to spend high draft picks on defensive players and they're not developing into good players, that falls on the defensive coordinator. And I think that's where I talked myself into Al Golden is he came from college. And what do you got to do in college? You've got to develop young players. You've got to. Or else they just don't turn. Like you can get the 5 and 4 stars, but they still got to develop into being really good collegiate athletes. And now we're getting a guy in here that's spent a lot of his time in college football. He's got a chance to develop young players, and that's what really excites me about this. He was also a part of. Al Golden was here when we went to the Super Bowl. He was our linebackers coach when Jermaine Pratt and Logan Wilson were thought of to be, the best linebackers in the league. Or one of the best pair of linebackers in the league, good enough to get extensions. So are we bringing that back? I see a lot of Bengals fans, and you always make fun of Cincinnati sports for this reason, that it feels like we just rehash things, right? The safeties weren't good. Let's bring back Von Bell.
We're the city of retreads.
Right.
And for those that don't know what a retread is, it's when you take a tire that has basically already been used and you decide instead of buying a new tire and you decide you want to go out and save a little money and you want to try to repatch the old tire and make it new again. But if you've ever been on the side of the road or if you've seen as you're driving down the highway those big old kind of straight strips of rubber that looks like they came off a semi, those would be called retreads. Right. But go ahead.
So that's what essentially he was a guy that was in this room, in our coaching staff just a few years ago. And obviously he went off and did great things in Notre Dame. But I think that's where Bengals fans are a little upset, is because it feels like we just copped out, right? They would have liked to see a more extensive defensive coordinator search. And I'll say this to Bengals fans straight up. I get wanting Robert Saleh. I get wanting Dennis Allen, the top name defensive coordinators. We're Bengals fans. Really wasn't ever in the cards. I would like to fire Zach Taylor tomorrow and hire prime Vince Lombardi. Problem is that's not a reality. That can't happen because we play with one arm behind our back. So I think the best case scenario is you get a guy that has spent time developing young players, a guy that has been in the room that obviously has some connections to Zach Taylor, and it is just took a Notre Dame team and made a defense on a Notre Dame team for the first time in my lifetime look up to par with these top-tier offenses, look up to par with an SEC team, look up to par with a Big Ten team in Penn State. So I get not getting super excited about the hire. I saw someone put this up. It's a B+ hire. It's an F process of hiring. Who cares how you get there? I think it's gonna be a good hire. I like how we got someone to develop, but I get all the concerns about retreads. And quickly before we get your thoughts on that, we do have a super chat. Chi-Town Real Estate, Adam House. It's been a while since I've thrown money at the ladies on stage.
Nice.
Love y'all. Have you ever felt like a stripper before?
No, have not, but now I do.
Happy belated birthday to Chi-Town Real Estate Adam House. He recently had a birthday. I'm
nice.
Facebook friends with him. So
well, we all do have them. It's just that some have some in certain parts of the year, and others have some different parts of the year. And we all wish each other happy birthdays every time we get to them. I love that. It's my favorite tradition that we do in society. Happy birthday, as if none of us, don't have them or something.
It's a day It's a day. In a world.
I know. I'm like the grouchy old man sometimes where it's just like, do you like anything? It's like, I don't know. There are times where I wonder, do I like anything? Why am I always like this? But yeah, birthdays have always been like the weird thing in my brain. It's like, man, people get like extremely excited about birthdays, and it just seems like that is something we all share. But maybe it's just we're celebrating life. That's what we're doing.
It's I think it's also like there's 7 billion people on this planet, and and I know there's thousands and millions of people that have the same birthday as you, but it's one day. You're going to be like, oh, today's about me.
Gotcha.
Right?
All right.
So it's us, our self-centered society gets to be a little more self-centered for a day.
So Al Golden obviously starts his coaching career at Virginia, moves on to Boston College where he's a linebackers coach. Penn State, then he goes to Penn State, becomes a linebacker coach, and he really didn't bust onto the scene until he went to Temple, right? He goes to Temple, he takes a historically bad program, a job in which I remember people saying, you should never take that job. It's basically a death sentence. It's very similar to what they used to say about the Detroit Lions, might I add. Goes to Temple, actually turns them around to where they become a very good program, and then he goes to Miami and things really, that's where, as they say, shit hits the fan. So gets fired at Miami. They get, I think, blown out, if I remember, by Clemson, like 100-0. Now, I know that's not the real score, but it was close to that. And then moves on from there, and, he jumps into the NFL, and he is the Bengals coach as a linebackers coach. And I think my thing is with this whole Al Golden thing is every time I hear Bengals fans talk about him, they reference the linebackers coach with the Bengals when they went to the Super Bowl. And I'm not downplaying that, but that's not Al Golden's biggest accomplishment as a football coach.
No, it's
not even close. Like, if I were to want to argue why you would want Al Golden in the building is because he went to Temple, he turned that whole thing around. You have to be, and I say this like with as much respect as possible, you have to be a dude. Like, there's only so many guys that are dudes when it comes to coaching, that are actual difference makers. Many times have you seen guys that have been, again, handed over a position that one would argue was given to them, and they do their best to run with it, but they never build it. They weren't the one that had to come in when it was rubble and there was nothing there, and they had to figure out exactly which way it was to be built. He did that at Temple, and he had success. And you could say, well, he went to Miami, failed. So what? At least you got a guy that has the leadership and the capabilities of being able to build an organization. That's what I would be most proud about if I was a fan of the Bengals when it comes to Al Golden. You add on top of that he was with the Bengals when he went to the Super Bowl, and that's just kind of like a nice little cherry on top. But the meat and potatoes of the meal is Temple and what he did with Notre Dame. Now, some people might say Notre Dame and what he did there was largely because of Marcus Freeman. Oddly enough, I would also say if you take a step back, you're always going to need to have good assistants in order to really get anywhere. There's no really one great head coach that has terrible assistants and they have a good football team. Right. As you and I both know, and again, college baseball is what we've probably been closest to being able to see behind the scenes on. And I know college baseball is incredibly small when it comes to these football programs. But a lot of the tough, dirty work, and I'm not saying head coaches don't do anything when I say this, but a lot of the tough and dirty work, recruiting, watching tape, understanding, which players you probably should go after and which ones you shouldn't. That's all the assistants, almost entirely the assistants. And then you have the head coach who has to make the tough decisions and perhaps decide on one, player versus the other. But what you had said is probably the most gratifying thing from Al Golden's resume, which is he's found a way to identify talent at lesser places where they didn't have the cream of the crop to pick from. Right. And some might say Notre Dame is not that way. Well, I would say this. It's not been that way for a long time, and the only thing that's changed is either Marcus Freeman or Al Golden when it comes to that defense, because their defense was championship worthy. Their defense was, quite frankly, just as good as anyone else's defense in the country. Now, you could stack it up, and Ohio State by far was the best college football team this year, yes. But again, a lot of that predicated off the fact that they were very good on both sides of the ball, and offensively, they were elite. So you could argue Notre Dame, the only thing that they were, missing from being the best college football team in the country was a little bit of a better offense, which Al Golden has nothing to do with. You back up and you say, okay, when he was at Temple, what did he do? Well, clearly when you're at Temple, you are outmatched, outgunned in every facet of humanly possibility. So at Cincinnati, and I know you guys kind of beat up on yourselves a little bit when it comes to this, maybe you don't have the same benefits that some of the other NFL organizations have, and you said you had no chance to go get Robert Saleh. I would argue that the reason that Robert Saleh probably doesn't want to take the Bengals job, and I'm not suggesting for a single second that I think this is going to happen, but let's all face the reality. If the Bengals were to falter for one more season, even though they have Joe Burrow, I know it's not in Mike Brown's blood, and I get that many people will be like, oh, he'll be here forever. Look at Marvin Lewis. But I think that those coaches look at the job security of the head coach almost just as much as the opportunity that exists within the football team, because they want job security. Mm-hmm. And I think that if you're Saleh, you're a guy that went from a great job with the 49ers. You took a chance because you wanted to be the head coach. It obviously went the way that it does for every other Jets head coach. And then you move on. And then when you move on again, you're starting to ask yourself, I need to find somewhere where I think I can stick. And the truth is if I think if Zach Taylor perceptually was in a better spot, there's a chance you do get Robert Saleh. I think what stops you from getting Robert Saleh is not that you're the Cincinnati Bengals and you might not want to pay the money. I actually and maybe it's partly that. I'm not suggesting that it's not. But if you're telling me, put it this way, if you're telling me that money is the reason that you can't get Robert Saleh only, then I have a hard time believing that you're going to find a way to keep T and keep Jamar, unless you're just going to sit here and squeeze every penny there is possible out of the organization and say you have no money left. I mean, we're talking about the difference of what, a couple $1 million, Reid?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with the salary cap. It's literally just money that you go to the team. The problem with Robert Saleh is a couple. You hit on a few of them. He would never come to Cincinnati because if as much of there's an opportunity, there's a very low bar that you have to clear to be successful. Because I think if the Bengals have a top half of the league defense, like literally if they have the 15th best defense in the league, right in the middle, 16th best defense right in the middle, right, this team wins a lot of games, and your job's going to be secure here for the time being. That being said, if it's a disaster season, they don't make the postseason, they go 7-10 or whatever. Guess what? Zach Taylor's fired, his whole coaching staff's gone too. So it's a flip flop. If this next year, you basically got all your chips on the table. It's one last roulette spin. The thing about Robert Saleh too is Zach Taylor's making like $5 million. Robert Saleh is going to make about $5 to $6 million as a DC somewhere else, and he wasn't going to make. You can't hire a DC and have him make more money than your head coach. That just can't be the case. And you're right about job security. All these coaches, they pretty much get one shot to be a head football coach, and once that goes away, you can be a DC for life. We're seeing that with Steve Spagnuolo. He's been a great DC for 20 years. He was the St. Louis Rams coach for 3 years, 15 years ago. It was a disaster. And now what does he do? He just wins Super Bowls with the Kansas City Chiefs every single year, and it's a revolving door of people there, but he keeps winning. So Robert Saleh is just looking, hey, where can I coach for 5 years, make my $7 million, be somewhat successful? He'll probably go back to the 49ers and coach there once again under Kyle Shanahan. But, yeah, I mean, Bengals fans – thinking that you're going to get Robert Saleh is like being a Reds fan and thinking, oh, we need a left-handed pitcher. We're going to go get the $230 million Max Fried. Like it's just not possible. So why even think about it? Because it just never was going to be the case. There's so many things stacked up against us that you gotta top tier. All right, no dice. Let's go second tier. I mean, we hired Zach Taylor, who had never been a head coach and he'd been an offensive coordinator for 1 year in his entire coaching career, and it was in college, and it was bad.
Right.
So
the other thing I would say about the hiring, the process, and the situation, people were saying, I don't like the hiring process. That is irrelevant when it comes to the success of that job when push comes to shove. If Al Golden has success, no one's going to go back and praise the hiring process and be like, well, they did such a good job of how they went about getting Al Golden. We should continue to make sure that that's the process moving forward. And then, although on the opposite side, if things go bad, they're going to point towards the fact of how the process went. The truth is that when you're hiring, the goal of hiring should be trying to find the best person. And if you think you know who that best person is, then perhaps you don't need to have 25 interviews with 25 different people. The other part of it is that when you're in a close-knit community that is NFL coaching fraternity, there is a lot of kind of overlap of communication of, what guys are what, and do you like this guy, and what's this guy's personality, and do you think that they would fit in here? And let's face it, hiring almost always, they say, comes down to who you know. And why is that? The reason that it comes down to who you know is the comfortability and the trust that comes from the people that are actually making the hire. They want to feel like they can trust what they're getting. Very rarely are you going to hire somebody that they walk into a room, you interview them for an hour, 2 hours, you ask them a bunch of questions, they walk out of the room and you're like, I think that that's who I'm going to hire to be my defensive coordinator, even though I don't have any experience outside of these 2 hours, and all I'm doing is trusting what I hear from other people. Or are you going to go hire a guy that's been in your building, that has a pretty damn good resume, and you feel like you would fit into what you're trying to build? Let's be honest with ourselves. Al Golden had the front-running ticket to this job for a while.
Correct.
And the truth is that was who they wanted. And I would be willing to bet the same way that the Reds asked Tito Francona before they hired David Bell. And again, this is me speculating. Some people might take my word and say that he knows for sure. But I'm just reading the tea leaves. I'm not new to this thing that is called life. And the reality is that Tito Francona accepted the Reds' job before they fired David Bell.
Right.
They got Tito. They said, see you, David. Sorry, but we got our guy. They probably called Al Golden's representation. They said, hey, we kind of need to know on the front end here, are you taking this job or not? We can work this out. I don't know what the rules are, but forget the rules because nobody follows those anyway. They knew who they had. That's why after the national championship, right when the clock struck 0, all of a sudden there's, Adam Schefter and the rest of the NFL fraternities tweeting out that, there's major speculation that the Bengals are going to hire Al Golden. Talk about the hiring process all you want, but don't fool yourselves into thinking that Al Golden wasn't the guy they wanted, and he was the guy that decided that he was going to take the job. So that was the hiring process. It was over.
So that's where you either look like a genius or you look like an idiot, because you're absolutely right. Al Golden never sold his house in Cincinnati. Like, he still had a home here in Cincinnati. And from the moment that I think that Zach Taylor and the brass of the Bengals decided to fire Lou Anarumo, the idea was, all right, we're going to go get Al Golden. And they interviewed 3 people. They interviewed Al Golden and Patrick Graham, and I forget Covington from the New England Patriots. That's the Rooney Rule, right? You interviewed 2 minority candidates, and then you always knew from the get-go that it was going to be Al Golden, and they knew that from the get-go. So that's where in a year or 2 years, whenever we get the dust to settle on this whole thing, if it looks like a home run hire, you praise them. Because you go, they knew who they wanted. They got exactly who they wanted. From the second that they fired Lou Anarumo, it was Al Golden all along, and it worked out. On the vice versa, if it doesn't pan out and it doesn't work, you go, man, they never even tried to get a better defensive coordinator. They never even tried. They fired Lou Anarumo and just brought the same guy that'd been in the office 2 years prior. So it's a catch-22. You're right either way. We're gonna do this with hindsight. We're gonna look back in 3-4 years and go, that was a great hire. I'm glad they did that. Or this was a terrible hire. I wish they would have gone out and done some other things. So the process is an F because there was no process. They didn't even try.
Yeah, and I guess it's an F only if it doesn't work, because if it does work, then the process was the way they should have gone about it in the first place, which is kind of how it always goes. It reminds me of the same thing that many people are doing with the hiring of the defensive coordinator. They will also do in April when it comes to the NFL draft. They're going to see a name. They're going to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we overstepped and took this guy at 19 or in the 3rd round or whatever draft pick they take.
Right.
Until they perform on the field, right? Like, the only real reason that we all complain that, Miles Murphy was taken in the 1st round and this, that, and the next is because he hasn't performed to the expectation that people wanted from a 1st rounder, period.
Right.
And I know you can use the excuse all you want about how, the Bengals had the 1st pick. There still was a debate at one point whether they take Jamar Chase or Penei Sewell. Now, I know it would have worked out both ways. I get that. But my point is that we can't on the back end sit here and act like there weren't people arguing that they should take this versus the next. Right. The truth is that there's not one single soul in this city right now that would probably admit if they were a part of a big debate in front of 100,000 people and they knew that they weren't going to get ousted, that they would prefer to have taken the lineman now over Jamar Chase. So, there was plenty of them out there. And I'm not suggesting they didn't have a reason for what they were saying, but the results will always dictate the perception of what you're doing, no matter what. Mm-hmm. No matter what. You could be the best culture guy in the world, right? And that's what Zach Taylor has been praised for in the past. But no one cares about culture if you don't win. Right. And if you do win, no one cares about culture in the opposite way. It can be toxic. It can be terrible. You hear about the Patriot way and how people couldn't stand being in the building, this, that, and the next. Now, how much truth that is, I don't know. But if you win, no one cares. No one cares. That's what this league's about. It's what it's always going to be about. And I would just say this about Al Golden. He's found ways to win with less. And if you think that that's maybe the most important job that there is when it comes to the NFL, because when I say with less, you aren't given a special pedigree. You aren't given an advantage in the NFL. At least that's my perception. Some people may think differently. I think the reason that the NFL is the best league in the world by far, and it will continue to be that way unless something changes, is that genuinely you are going to have success based off the decisions that you make that are relatively equal to everyone else and what they have. You can win in the NFL in the smallest franchise, and you can lose in the NFL with the biggest franchise. And we see it all the time. The New York Jets are a mess. The Kansas City Chiefs are world champions, what seemingly seems like every single year. And that's a very good recipe for having a great league. Now, the question ultimately comes down to, can Al Golden find players in the NFL draft that are going to have success? Because that's all this comes down to.
He's going to have to develop them. Yeah, he's
Do
gonna...
you think so not to
Yes,
jump on the split.
yes, 100%.
I don't think development is as big of a deal as people make it out to be. As much as it is, you have to be right on certain players. Like, they're either good players or they're not. Doesn't matter what they're ranked. Doesn't matter what they're ranked. I do think that there is maybe a small semblance of making guys better. But I don't think for a single second. I mean, Nick Saban.
You think it's scouting?
Yeah, 100%.
So you think like when the Rams can turn Puka Nacua from a 6th-round pick to a bona fide one of the top 10 wide receivers in the league, it's because it's when the Chiefs constantly turn over 5th and 6th-round picks into NFL-level starters at the cornerback position. It's because they scouted better. It's not because they developed. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle of that recipe.
Are you considering development a part of a system? Because I think a system, and when I say system, I think of just schematics. I don't think of we're coming in the building and we're working on these drills, and then all of a sudden after you do these drills, you become a good enough football player to be very good in the NFL. I would say a lot of these guys, the margin and difference in athleticism is so minuscule. There are obviously elite superstars. Jamar Chase does things that you can't teach to Trent Irwin. And I'm not trying to downplay Trent Irwin. Well, let's face it, he's not got the same God-given abilities that Jamar Chase has. But overall, the margin for difference between what I would call mid-level players or upper mid-level players is not very big. I do think it matters what position you put them in, which is why Zach Taylor kind of gets probably a healthy and or fair amount of criticism, even though they have one of the best offenses in the league, yes. But it does seem like he doesn't put his players in a great position to succeed at times. He just relies on pure athleticism and Joe Burrow's God-given ability to move around a pocket and extend a play, find someone downfield, and all of a sudden we're like, wow, this is great. We got one of the best offenses in the league. I would just argue that one of the best traits that I think a defensive coordinator can have is understanding the personnel that they need and being able to put a system in place that allows them to be successful. I don't believe in the idea of basically drafting anybody, and I'm not saying anybody, but drafting players, and then when you get them in the building, you can magically make them good football players.
Well, it takes time, right? I mean, how many players have we seen not be good when they're rookies, or they looked like they just a terrible miss their first 2 years, and then somewhere along the way they become really good players. We see this with linemen all the time because they need to learn the NFL game, and it's similar. And you're right, the talent pool is so high at the talent level in the NFL is so far greater beyond college sports that there is a climb, but they still need to learn how to be a National Football League player. So I think it is a combination of development and scouting. And as we know, the Bengals I think that they have the smallest scouting department in the league. They rely on their coaches to do a lot of it. I think they have like three hired scouts, something like that, when the Rams have 15. So that's just another area where you're just hiding behind the 8 ball. But we'll see. This is what the NFL is, because what you said, because the salary cap, because draft picks, when you get guys that you absolutely have to extend, Joe Burrow's, Jamar Chase's, Trey Hendrickson, and you use a lot of your money towards them, all of a sudden you're going to have to consistently hit in the draft. It's the same thing. There's no mystery to success in the NFL. You get a quarterback, you get a coach, you draft well. 3 things. That's the recipe. It's eggs, sugar, and flour. That's what makes the cake. And if you can't hit in the draft for whatever, you're scouting the wrong players, you can't develop the right players, the guys you can get in aren't getting better, then you're not going to be successful in this league very long. And that's where Lou Anarumo, I think, gets that's where he got killed, is these young players weren't getting better. We're using these high draft picks on these players, and they weren't getting better. They were kind of sitting the same. Right. When NFL players came into the system, they were okay. Eli Apple, Trey Hendrickson, all these guys that we got in free agency, Awuzie, that worked out. But when we started getting draft picks and they weren't getting better, that's why he lost his job. And that's where you take a college coach like Al Golden, who has developed players, because you have to do that in college. And that's where you're going to hope that he can do a little bit better.
There's two things over the course of watching sports that I've decided I'm not going to do anymore because I've done it at one time and it's always basically been a worthless endeavor. One is judge the draft picks that exist on the NFL draft every single year based off of what I perceive of whether or not they got someone that was good or bad. The whole grades that you see online about whether they got an A or an F based off of whoever they drafted in the NFL is literally just a math problem based off of what you had pre-draft. Has nothing to do with the needs of the team, has nothing to do with whether or not they're good players. It's just your perception of whether or not they're good. So it's relatively meaningless. And the second thing is hiring coaches. I always tend to take a step back at first and being like, well, let me see this play out. You have a perception right when it happens, yes. There's no doubt that when Scott Satterfield was hired at UC, a lot of people were like, really? I mean, if you look at what happened at Louisville, it looked like a dumpster fire. It's never a good thing when the other team's fan base is cheering for joy while they send their head coach to you. And that's what happened. And maybe Scott Satterfield will turn it around. But I very much had that same thought. And again, I can only reflect back on the experiences that I had as a fan. But when Todd Monken was hired as the offensive coordinator at the University of Georgia, I was disappointed, if you want to call it that. It just so happened to turn out that Todd Monken was by far the best offensive coordinator that the University of Georgia has ever had since I started watching him. He then proceeds to go to the Ravens, and they magically, and again, they have great players. So I'm not saying it's Todd Monken. Sure. But they have been consistently at the top of the league, at the very top of the league in rushing and passing this past season. And Todd Monken was the guy that was calling the plays. Now, backtrack a little bit on this, is I would also say in the same breath that there are times where you think you know based off the resume of the past of the coach, and that's what they're going to do in their new position. But I'm starting to believe, and I do think, that every position in and of itself is a new and a fresh start. Doesn't matter if you were the guy at this spot. Look at Al Golden's resume. He starts at Temple. He turns that thing around. You think, oh my God, if he can turn around Temple, he's going to turn around the U. They're going to be the next, they're going to be like the old glory days of the U. Right. And it turns into a dumpster fire, right? Todd Monken was with the Browns, if you didn't know. He was with the Browns. Historically bad. Got absolutely crushed. Crushed. And the Browns, with all due respect, they're just terrible. I mean, there's really, I mean, if you're...
It seems impossible to be that bad in this league. It seems truly impossible.
It is actually as remarkable as the Chiefs and the Patriots dynasties have been. I mean this wholeheartedly, and people think this is a bit. I'm being dead ass serious. I'll look right into the camera on this one. As impressive as the Patriots and the Chiefs have been about winning in the NFL, the Browns have been just as impressive about floundering in the NFL for as long as they have. Period. Now, but back to the whole perception of when you're hired. I don't think you can look back at someone's resume and be like, well, just because he didn't, work out at Miami, somehow he's not going to be a good football coach in the NFL, vice versa. The last thing I'll say about Al Golden before we move on to another topic is he's clearly respected. Because the way you can find out if somebody's respected around the league and or coaching circles is they get a job doing something that maybe they aren't very experienced in, but they get hired to do it because somebody trusts the fact that, you know what, I just want this guy in my building. He's a great football coach, and he'll be able to figure it out. I'd rather hire this guy for, tight ends, which he played tight end at Penn State. But I'd rather hire this guy as a tight end coach for my organization, which he got hired to do. I'm looking back at his resume here. He got hired to serve as, let's see here. After he had gotten fired, he goes to serve the tight ends coach for the Lions. And the Lions could have not given him a job after he had gotten fired. But they chose to. He then jumps, obviously, with the Bengals after that. And he then finds himself at Notre Dame. Most coaches that aren't respected And there's a good amount of them. You can look at guys' resumes where they were climbing the ladder, Reid, and then they got knocked off the ladder, and then they just never came back. Like, they just don't coach anymore. And I'm not saying that that's always a perception of them being a bad person or a bad coach. But I think you build a resume and you build a pedigree up of what kind of person you are and whether or not people want to be around you and whether or not you're a knowledgeable football coach. And if you always get hired year after year, even if you get fired somewhere, you get let go. Robert Saleh is a good example. He's always going to probably have a job, more likely doing something. At some point, he might even be like
He'll probably be a DC again.
Well, he could be a DC, but let's just say the DC thing doesn't go well. If he really wanted a job, someone's going to hire him as an analysis or something along those lines. Like, you're always going to be hired somewhere. Al Golden's been that. People that think this is a terrible hire, this is the Bengals being the Bengals. Again, I'm not a Bengals fan. I'm just saying openly, like, he's got a great resume. And the truth is that you don't know whether or not he's going to be a great coordinator until he actually does it, which seems crazy to sit here and argue about whether or not it was a good process or not.
I don't think anybody thinks this is a bad hire. I don't think there's a soul that thinks this is a bad hire. I think it is just a little more frustration from Bengals fans just going like, we did the retread again. And you know what? You're right. Good coaches will.
Is he a retread though? He's not a retread. That's how a retread to me would be like he was a defensive coordinator somewhere, got fired. Josh McDaniels, is that his name? Am I getting that right?
Mike McDaniels, I believe is his name.
Josh
McDaniels. Yeah.
Josh McDaniels is in the Patriots.
Yeah.
That's a retread. If you want to hire him to be a head coach again, that's a retread. He's failed twice at the same position.
Well, he's the OC there in Patriots.
But he's an OC there. He's a different job. I'm saying he's not a retread as a defensive coordinator. He's had unbelievable success as a defensive coordinator.
It's a retread because we hired somebody from the room, right? Someone that when
you went to the Super Bowl,
it was almost right. It's valuable. It's almost like Mike Brown sat in the room, and when they fired Lou Anarumo, Mike Brown just goes, Didn't that one guy that used to coach here, isn't he doing some good things up in Notre Dame? Let's hire that guy. Like that's what it feels like. And while that might not be true, that might not be fair, that's what it feels like. And also, I think Al Golden's a good hire. Like, I think it's a pretty good hire. It stinks that it's always somebody that was here before. Right? It's never someone else. It's always someone that was here before. That's where Callahan, Dan Pitcher, I forget where Lou Anarumo was before he was hired here. Yeah. But it's just it feels a little bit like the retread. The dude never left. He still owned his home in Cincinnati. He never sold it. Like, he was living here in the summer. So it is what it is. And I think that it's important to coach under other great defensive coaches. Like Patrick Graham, who was rumored also to be one of our leading candidates. He's the DC over in Oakland. He did really well with a bad defense over there in Oakland. He coached under Bill Belichick. He coached under all those great coaches, great defensive coaches over in New England, and obviously had success under Antonio Pierce as the DC there. Al Golden coached under Marcus Freeman, which, if you asked football fans, give me a short list of the best defensive minds coaching college or NFL right now, Marcus Freeman's up there because he was a great defensive coach in Cincinnati. He was the DC in Notre Dame for that final year with Brian Kelly, and he's turned Notre Dame into competing with these top-tier programs in college. So I think that's important that he also coached under a really good defensive coach in Marcus Freeman.
Well, I think if you look back at the success that Marcus Freeman has had, I think you could argue that maybe some of the most impressive things that he has done isn't even what he did this past season with Notre Dame football. And I know that might be a stretch for some. What I would also say is that he was, and again, I know that I'm not trying to take anything away from Luke Fickell. I'm really not. I think Luke Fickell did a great job at UC. I'm not trying to undercut what he did. But Marcus Freeman's name, when you were inside the circles of people around that football program, Marcus Freeman's name was the heir apparent to Luke Fickell. It's almost like they loved Marcus Freeman. They want to keep Marcus Freeman. But what are you going to do? You're going to tell Luke Fickell that he's got to leave or he's fired because you want Marcus Freeman to be the head coach? But that was talked about. They were hopeful that Marcus Freeman was going to take Luke Fickell as the replacement there. And I would also say, quite frankly, and I guess I'm hinting at it, Marcus Freeman was probably one of the main guys that went out and found all of what we know now as NFL stars is a strong word, quality NFL players that played at UC during that time. Luke Fickell leaves. You look at what he left at the cupboard, and the cupboard is quite bare. And I'm not suggesting for a single second that Market Freeman was totally the reason why UC football was what it was, but I would say he had a lot to do with it. And then he moves on, obviously, to Notre Dame, and you find out that perhaps maybe he was, of all of the stops between UC being very, very good and then now Notre Dame becoming relevant, maybe he was the guy behind a lot of it.
He full-blown earned this. Like, he earned this opportunity. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's a great football coach, period. And I know that his name will be rumored to go to the NFL, and rightfully so, but I just suggest that, like we've always talked about, it seems like when you have a good gig going and you're at a place that you're comfortable with and you have a chance to continue to do something that you love, the grass isn't always greener. And I hope Marcus Freeman just continues to coach at Notre Dame and they continue to be relevant, because it's better for the sport for Notre Dame to be good, quite frankly, than it is for them to be terrible. And, you know, maybe he's special enough to go overturn the Jets, or maybe he's special enough to be able to. And listen, Dan Campbell figured it out to a certain extent in Detroit.
We'll see what happens next.
But that, again, not to get on the soapbox that is Lou Anarumo, but Dan Campbell's only 3 or 4 short seasons away from also finding himself in the same predicament, and that is life in the NFL. All right, we don't have breaks today, so for those that are wondering if we're on radio, we're not on radio. I guess we're going to try to go 2 straight hours of straight sports talk, which is, we'll see how it goes, possible. Yeah. But we have a couple other things that we wanted to get into. You have conference championships on here. Certainly the NFL, it feels like a rerun. It feels like deja vu time and time again. I want to get into Major League Baseball, quite frankly, towards the end of this show. Okay. Talk about some things yesterday that I ran into. I won't divulge kind of all of it, but I had a conversation yesterday with a guy that played Major League Baseball for 10 years and thankfully knew of our show. It was kind of cool. But more importantly, we talked about the game itself. And I thought that his perspective on the game of baseball and where it's at and where it's headed was very telling. And we'll talk about that towards the back end of this show. But next, you want to talk about?
Well, I think Kirby wants you to comment on Carlos Estevez.
Yeah.
You got to take on Carlos Estevez, 32-year-old relief pitcher. He had a 2.45 ERA for the Phillies last year. Your thoughts on right-handed pitcher Carlos Estevez being rumored to be a Cincinnati Red?
They need help in the bullpen. I definitely think that there's going to be probably a drop-off between what we've experienced in the past with the bullpen and probably this upcoming season. But at the same time, is Estevez going to fix all of those problems? I don't know if that's going to be the case.
One small tidbit that I've not seen anybody talk about this when it comes to Carlos Estevez, which is just my brain is full of useless knowledge.
Yes.
So, who played Ricky Vaughn in Major League?
Charlie Sheen?
Charlie Sheen is correct.
By the way, that's a bold move by you to come to me of any kind of culture topic, because the fact that I pulled that out, I'm proud of myself. I know that seems like an obvious answer to about 99% of the people that watch this show, but the fact that I just pulled Charlie Sheen, I'm gonna go home and feel good about that.
I was gonna give it to you, even if I was just gonna help you along the way. But you know what Charlie Sheen's real name is? Carlos Estevez.
Really?
So you're signing Wild Thing, Ricky Vaughn.
Maybe that's the start of the journey.
That's right.
That could be a very good parallel between Major League and what is your Cincinnati Reds. Sadly, but possible.
That's right.
I don't know. I don't have a comment on it. I'm gonna wait. Here's the thing with the Reds. I don't want to get too far down this path because I'm gonna save it towards the end of the show. I have decided that I'm going to try to do what my grandfather has always taught me in sports, which I've not done a great job of. Don't get too high, don't get too low. No matter what happens, you got to find a way to be consistent. Whether the game's going great or whether the game's going terrible, you've got to recalibrate yourself and find a way to be the best player you can be. And right now, for some reason, which I'm sure we'll get in towards the end of this show, I have been battling a demon. I have been battling a deep, dark demon. Whether it's this weather, whether it's the way that, I don't know, the NFL season has shaken out, But when it comes to Major League Baseball, and I get the Dodgers have done what they have, maybe it's their fault, but I have been battling this demon that is excitement for the 2025 season. And as somebody that obviously is part of a show that goes live after every single game,
Right.
there is a fear that I can't find the genuine excitement that I had at the beginning of last season. And I've continued to tell myself every day, Trace, you were excited about last season, and the team this season is better than the team last season. You've got to find solace in that.
Solace.
Yeah, I got to put that word in there somewhere today. And it's been very difficult to do. And I will get there at some point, but I'll talk about Major League Baseball as a whole here in just a bit. But what else are we talking about? You want to talk about the NFL?
I want to talk about the conference championships because it's this Sunday. I think has it hit you yet that there's only 3 football games left?
No, it has not hit me yet, although I do admit that I think that even though there's only 3 football games left, it is like the best part of the meal. It's almost like you sit down at a fine dining restaurant that you absolutely love. You know you're going to spend an absolute insane amount of money while you're there. You're going to get the bill, and you're going to kind of regret it on the way out. But you're starting to get down to the last kind of, to use maybe an analogy here, you know, the last kind of few bites of when you have ice cream with some kind of cake or some kind of warm cookie.
Sure.
You get down to the very end of that, and it's like those are the best bites that there are. That's what this NFL season is right now. And yes, there's only maybe a couple bites left, but they're the best bites. So I'm going to enjoy them. And baseball is only maybe a month and a half away here, so you can kind of hang your hat on that as well.
We're less than 2 months away from the first regular season baseball game over in Japan. I got to wake up at 5 in the morning to watch the Cubbies take on the Dodgers.
Wow.
So that'll be fun. But all right, so the conference championship is this weekend. I have a simple question to you because this is where a lot of takes are crafted is the postseason. It's the same reason that we talk about Lamar Jackson can't play in the postseason, all this stuff. This is where takes are crafted. This is the meat and potatoes of the meal of the NFL season. Yeah. Who has the most to gain this weekend from these 2 conference championship games? Because I think we can all agree that the Chiefs pretty much, it's set in stone, right? They're a dynasty. Patrick Mahomes won 3 championships. He wins another one. Yeah, it's another feather in the cap, but you're just like, all right, we already think of you so highly. Short list of names would be Josh Allen, who's 0-3 against Patrick Mahomes in the postseason. You've got Nick Sirianni, who I would say is one of the crazier coaches in the NFL, constantly fighting with fans and players and coaches, but he consistently wins, so he can go win another NFC championship. You got the rookie Jayden Daniels, Saquon Barkley changes teams. Who has the most to gain this weekend from winning the game?
I think it's an easy answer. I think that more or less the obvious answer is Josh Allen. It's the only answer in my opinion, and I think Josh Allen by far can cement his legacy as he will already be one of the all-time greats, but then you don't want to be put inside of a class that exists when you get your name linked to a Dan Marino. And that's where Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, to be quite frank, will be if they're not capable of getting the Lombardi. And even Joe Burrow, if we're being completely honest. So Josh Allen has the greatest to gain. Because if you win 1 Super Bowl, even if you fail time and time again, it's over. You've done it. Aaron Rodgers is a perfect example of that. One of the best maybe quarterbacks of all time. But the truth is he won 1 Super Bowl, and he faltered in many opportunities to get the second one. But no one in 30, 40 years from now is probably going to discuss how Aaron Rodgers never won a Super Bowl. And I think that if you do get one, it's over. Josh Allen can win a Super Bowl. To be fair, though, Josh Allen also has the most to lose. I think if Josh Allen...
I don't think he has the most to lose.
By far has the most to lose.
I think there's one guy that has more to lose, and it's his coach, Sean McDermott. Because if he goes 0-4 against the Chiefs in the postseason...
They're used to that in Buffalo.
You're right. That's right. That's a good callback to the 90s. But yeah, I don't know how you can continue to go on. And I think Sean McDermott's a pretty good coach. I think he is the best version of a Zach Taylor in the NFL in terms of obviously isn't because of the head coach. We do that with Andy Reid. We do that with Kyle Shanahan. We don't do that with Sean McDermott or Zach Taylor. I think Sean McDermott might lose his job if he loses this game. And I know that's crazy to say, but I don't know how you continue going on, or at least his seat gets red hot after this.
It depends on the way the which the game kind of goes for him to be on the hot seat, in my opinion. And then people can say there's no moral victories in the NFL. There aren't moral victories, but there are ways to extend your job if things go certain ways, right? Zach Taylor probably is a very good example of this, in my opinion. Zach Taylor had a quarterback that got hurt. That could be argued as to why they had one of the disappointing seasons. The next year, the defense was significantly, terrible. There's no other way to say it, but the defense was one of the league's worst. So then you say, well, he's in part of the offense. I know he's the head coach, but he's a part of the offense, so you kind of give him a pass there. If Zach Taylor were to go out next season and they were to make the postseason and somehow some fluky thing happens and they lose the first playoff game, you're going to have a lot of people that are going to say, well, you can't fire the guy. They were one play away from this.
Right.
That matters. If you go out and you play the Chiefs this week and you're Sean McDermott and you lose by 3 scores, I think you're on the hot seat immediately. Whereas it depends on the way in which the game goes. So I know winning and losing is the only thing that really matters. It doesn't matter how much you win by, how much you lose by. Basically when it comes to winning a Super Bowl, but it does when it comes to making hiring decisions. And Sean McDermott, I don't think has the most to lose because no one's going to talk about Sean McDermott anyways in 20 years. They're going to talk about Josh Allen. If you want to talk about legacy, Sean McDermott is, no offense to him, but he's going to be like the guy that's changing your oil when you go to Valvoline. You're going to say hi to him. You're going to be nice. After 10 minutes, you're going to forget his name. You're not going to know him, and you're going to forget him for the rest of your life. I think that's the same case when it comes to Sean McDermott, when it comes to NFL football as a whole, when you look back at it from the history perspective. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Sean McDermott rattles off 2, 3, 4 Super Bowls, and all of a sudden he's looked up at the same way that maybe Andy Reid or someone else would be looked at. But the truth is that Josh Allen is already immortal when it comes to the NFL football, the way that he's played the game, the way he's changed, the way you would perceive how some quarterbacks can be successful. And Josh Allen has the most to gain, also has the most to lose. The one that has a free run at this thing, can do no wrong, is Jayden Daniels. If he goes out and throws 4 interceptions and he plays terrible, everyone's going to still say, Jayden Daniels had a great season. He had a rookie moment. He'll bounce back from it. It doesn't matter. But if he goes out and throws for 4 touchdowns and they find themselves in the Super Bowl, Jayden Daniels immediately, I'm not saying he deserves to do it, but immediately will be put in the top level echelon of the NFL quarterbacks. I know I'm saying he's better than Josh Allen. I'm not saying he's better than Lamar Jackson. I'm not saying he's better than Joe Burrow and or Patrick Mahomes. I'm not suggesting that. But I will say, when you mention those names, they will probably have tag him along at the very end of those names as, you got Jayden Daniels with Washington. He might be able to make a mix. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. But that's what he has going for him, which is a free run at it. It almost feels like he's playing with house money at the casino. He's up $5,000 and he's already given his wife $3,000 and he's sitting with $2,000 left and he's like, well, if I lose it, I still won.
Well, I think it's a little more than that. I don't think it's fully house money. I liken it more to like you came in with $1,000, you're now up $50, and you're going to sit here and go like, all right, we got to leave with at least $45,000. But here's Jolly's been beating the table about Jayden Daniels because he could be the first rookie ever to win the Super Bowl. Like, we've never seen that. And Jolly, please correct me. Is he going to be would he be the first rookie to ever make the Super Bowl? I know Dan Marino made it very young, but I believe it was his second year. But I'm with you on the Jayden Daniels thing. I think there's 4 guys that there's not a soul who is being honest, looking in the mirror and being honest, saying these are the 4 best quarterbacks in the league. And that's Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow. I have absolutely no problem whatsoever putting Jayden Daniels right in there too. I really don't. Like, we try to do it all the time. We try to do it with CJ last year. We try to do it with Justin Herbert earlier this year. And those are great quarterbacks. I think they're really good quarterbacks. I think Jayden Daniels, when you see special. Yeah, when you see special. Jayden Daniels, you don't have to talk yourself into it at all.
No.
Like, you had to talk, well, CJ's got Nico Collins, who looks really good. And Dak Prescott had some really good years. Yeah, but he's got a great O-line. He's got a pretty good run game. Justin Herbert, you talk yourself, he's got Jim Harbaugh. You don't have to talk yourself into anything about Jayden Daniels. You know that that's special from the get-go.
Right. To your point, historical context on this, there has not been a rookie quarterback that has started in the Super Bowl. Notable rookies that have played in the conference championship that did not get to the Super Bowl: Sean King, Ben Roethlisberger, Joe Flacco, Mark Sanchez, of all people, Brock Purdy, and Jayden Daniels. So Jayden Daniels has an opportunity to knock that door down. Whether or not he does, we shall find out. It does seem like Washington is playing with an opportunity that many people might not give them a chance at when they play against the Eagles, just based off of the pedigree and the history. I think they have a chance. I really do. I would argue that game is going to come down to some fourth quarter at the end of the game. It'll be over the course of the 60 minutes. The last 8 minutes are going to tell the story. And we'll see what happens with Jayden Daniels. And you know what the thing about Jayden is right now? He's young enough. And this happens all throughout life. And I even look back at my life and I think, man, I did something that I was so naive of how hard it was that I thought that it was kind of easy. And I think that that's a special place to be. And I think Jayden Daniels finds himself in that right now, is that what he doesn't know is best benefit. He doesn't probably think to himself right now how hard it is to get to the spot that he's in. But to him, same way that Joe Burrow said, my window is my career, and I'm not downplaying what he said and saying that he was wrong. But I mean, I think that just more or less speaks to the confidence that you have when you're young and you aren't exposed to the warts that exist within society or how hard things are in certain industries to do what you're doing. So we'll see. There's no doubt about Jayden Daniels has an excellent opportunity. I just think that he plays with house money. He could do no wrong. And maybe I look at that the wrong way because he may never get back to this spot.
I'll say this. I don't think the Commanders have a good shot because I think the Eagles have by far the best roster in the NFL. Like top to bottom, the only spots where they're lacking is they have the worst quarterback still around. Jalen Hurts is clearly the fourth best quarterback in the conference championship weekend. I think the Commanders roster is one of the worst rosters I've ever seen get to this game. Like, that's how special I think Jayden Daniels is. Like, I'm looking at the Commanders roster. It's worse than the Bengals did when they went to the Super Bowl.
To Jolly's point really quickly, he brings up Purdy, Flacco, Big Ben, and King within the list that I just said. He said that they all had a first and or third ranked defense. Jayden Daniels has the 18th ranked defense.
It's crazy. Like, he's that special because that NFC, we talked about how great the NFC was all season long, and I always falter to they don't have as good of quarterbacks, so I think the AFC's better. But he's ran through this, and he beat the Detroit Lions in 15 games, and he's doing it with a really bad roster. I mean, his running back is 30-year-old Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson, who are both good, right? But nowhere near. I mean, they got 35-year-old Zach Ertz as one of his second leading receiver. I know. Like, who was the last time you thought Zach Ertz was a threat? Right, he's still fine, but it's been a decade since you're like Zach Ertz can play some ball. Their roster, I swear it's worse than the one that the Bengals went to the Super Bowl with. That's how special Jayden Daniels is. And I don't think you're going to win. I think the Eagles are going to pretty handedly walk away with this one. But I just want to give flowers to Daniels because he's special. He really is special.
If I was a Bengals representative, I would point to what is happening in Washington as a very good example as to why I think T. Higgins should re-sign with the Bengals if you're trying to get him to re-sign with the Bengals, which is there are a lot of quarterbacks that elevate receivers that are good. You have to be a good receiver, yes. Maybe even use the term great if you'd like. But if you don't have a quarterback, your career goes to die. It doesn't take long to look throughout the history of wide receivers that have left one franchise and went to another, and they've completely vanished. And again, I know I have to use my own personal experience, but you watch a guy like Jordy Nelson leave the Packers who had basically an incredible run for a few years. He then dies as soon as he leaves the Packers. You look at a guy like Devontae Adams, quite frankly, who was probably the league's best receiver, then leaves. And I'm not saying he had good numbers, yes, but his career in and of itself has become relatively irrelevant because he doesn't play in big games anymore. Jayden Daniels has taken Terry McLaurin and made him relevant. He has. I mean,
Terry, really quickly, Terry's been a 1,000-yard receiver every year he's been in the league.
Yes, but he's not played in relevant games. He's not a superstar, even though he should be a superstar, is what I'm saying.
Right.
T. Higgins has an opportunity to be a superstar because he plays with arguably the biggest receiver name in the game outside of Justin Jefferson. Right. I'm just saying if I am a representative of the Bengals, I am trying to not again, leverage. And I know Joe Burrow is 100% going to be leveraged in trying to come back. Yes, it's probably the only leverage that the Bengals, quite frankly, have when it comes to this. But I think if you're T. Higgins, you have to genuinely think about your overall happiness in the league. And I would wonder if Terry actually has enjoyed his career in the NFL when he has tasted a little bit of success. And I'd be willing to bet if you went behind closed doors and you said, hey, if I told you were going to have a quarterback like this for most of your career and you're going to be playing in relevant football games that matter when it comes to winning and losing, how much money is that worth to you in your happiness? Right. And I know that's hard to do when you're at a negotiation table when it comes to money, but I would be willing to bet that that's something that you should consider, and I think T. Higgins will consider. But
I think, for what it's worth, I think that's the first time you dropped Solace. I think that was the first time I've dropped it.
I almost dropped It's Worth a Lot because I've started to think about just doing that to you every time. But I have crutch words. We all have crutch sayings. Everyone in the chat that if they were to do a show, they would say the same things. Yours is For What It's Worth, and that's okay. I can.
Well, yeah, we all have them. But for what it's worth about the T. Higgins thing, I think T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Joe Burrow, that they're all three trying their best to keep this thing together. And that's what I'll say about that. I asked someone this question. I'm looking at these conference championships, and the Eagles obviously have two really good receivers. They have A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. The Commanders have Terry McLaurin. Have you noticed that maybe wide receivers don't do a whole lot in the postseason? Have you noticed that? Like we're talking like the Chiefs are back-to-back Super Bowl champs after getting rid of Tyreek Hill.
They do. I would argue
the Bills are the most primed that they've ever been to win the Super Bowl after getting rid of Stephon Diggs.
I understand the point you're trying to make. I would just say that it goes back to the point that I've made in the past about a lot of these guys, the difference between them and the next guy is not that significant. But there is a top echelon certain amount of wide receivers. They're just not as important as quarterbacks, so we don't talk about them the same in regards to importance. And I agree with you. But in the same way that there's like maybe a handful, we'll call it 4 or 5 guys in the NFL that play quarterback that seem to be able to elevate the level of play of their team far more than the rest of the league. Then when you get past those 4 or 5 guys, it just seems like you can stack 15 of them together. It just seems like, I don't know, you can mix and match them, dime a dozen. I think the receiver is the same type of way. But I do think the Bengals have the benefit of having 2 guys. Again, I would say Higgins, the only reason that he isn't named as like maybe nationally as one of the elite guys is just because he's not been healthy. He's not been on the field. He's just not been on the field enough, in my opinion, to be talked about the same. But when you watch T. Higgins play and they're in a meaningful game, it's clear that he's, quite frankly, a huge weapon. And he's had unbelievable moments for the Bengals in postseason, which is why he's talked about the way that he is. I just would say that receivers matter, yes. But it's almost like, again, terrible a thought analogy here as people will make fun of this, but it's almost like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It really doesn't, it's nowhere near as good of a sandwich if you take one of the ingredients away. And that's obvious for many things. But I would just say that elite receivers paired with elite quarterbacks make a major difference. And Justin Jefferson's maybe one of the few guys in the league. Terry McLaurin is one of the few guys in the league to where it doesn't matter who the quarterback is, they're still going to have some success. But if you take those guys, and this is the scary part, if you were to take those guys and you put them with elite quarterback, then all of a sudden they become ultra dangerous. And the truth is with the Super Bowl and the NFL, the things that we talk about sometimes and we act like it's not that big of a deal because the margin isn't that big, but that is the NFL. The margins aren't very big in general.
Right.
So that is the difference. You know, Patrick Mahomes, as much as I want to complain, and I do the bit of, I don't think he's that good, this, that, and the next, and he's got all these guys around him. The truth is that Patrick Mahomes, the 2 throws that he makes a game, or he scrambles, or he throws the ball sideways and he gets a first down, it might be 3rd and 12 at their own 15-yard line. It's not the game-winning play, but it happens in the second quarter. He scrambles around and he gets the first down. And that first down leads to a field goal. That's the difference in the game. Mm-hmm. And as sad as that is, when it comes to maybe the nuances of we invest so much time and energy into this sport that we all love. The sad truth of it all is that injuries, a flag here and there, and an unfortunate bounce on a fumble here and there sometimes is the difference. And we want to make it out like there's these huge organizational things that happen, and that's why this team wins and that team doesn't.
Right.
Sometimes you get fortuitous bounces that go your way. But more times than not, the best teams put themselves in positions to get those bounces, and that's where you find yourselves talking about the Chiefs, the Bills, seemingly the Ravens, even though they've fallen short every single year. And the Bengals, I think, aren't that far behind that. It's just going to require them to draft better. Quite frankly, that's the only thing that stopped the Bengals from being elite.
The only other question, and you're right, it's you just got we've gotten one piece of the pie. We've gotten Joe. Can we figure out the other two? And Zach's not going anywhere. Zach's good enough to get us there, so I'm not worried about that. Can we just draft a little bit better? The only other question I'll ask about these conference championships games is, I already brought up the maybe wide receivers are like the icing on the cake, right? They're not the main ingredient of the cake, but they're the icing there.
Sure.
I also noticed that these games, Patrick Mahomes didn't start winning Super Bowls till their offense got a little ugly, right? When they were scoring 45 points a game, they didn't win. They didn't win the Super Bowl. Like, they lost in these playoff games. The Bills did the same thing. The Bills were scoring 40 points a game. They looked unstoppable. All of a sudden, they win a game against the Ravens where their offense didn't do a whole lot. They just did enough, right? And you even saw, like, you text us, I can't believe Josh Allen almost pitched that ball to James Cook on the goal line. A year or two ago, Josh Allen pitches that ball because he does the superhero thing. He puts on the cape. Sometimes, I think I saw Steve Young say this, sometimes the cape doesn't need to come on. Sometimes you just need to win the game. Much to the chagrin of me, you and Tom always bring up, during the Bengals 2 playoff runs, the games were kind of ugly. Joe just did enough to win the game. So I don't know how you quantify that. The easy thing is you need a great defense to win. I don't know how you quantify that, but it is interesting to me that I've seen the Chiefs do it now, where they score 40 points a game, they don't win the Super Bowl. Heck, go all the way back to the undefeated Patriots. They were scoring 60 points a game. They didn't win the Super Bowl.
Right.
The Bills, same way. You get rid of Stephon Diggs, you really quiet down this offense, start winning games in the postseason. I don't know. Once again, I don't know how you quantify that. I just find that incredibly interesting that winning ugly is a trait of champions.
And I think that the reason to quantify that, or the way in which that works more times than not, is I think offense is more or less a very intricate thing. It requires good timing. It requires a good feel for the game. Defense, I think, is much less than that. Defense is very much line up, do your job. You don't have to be precise. You just have to be consistent. And more or less, when you get into big games, you get into high pressure situations, right? The timing's just off. Basically the nerves allow there to become a little bit of doubt. And if you have a little bit of doubt, then that seeps into the fact that you don't throw the ball over the middle that you've thrown all regular season long, because in the regular season, if somehow maybe that ball gets tipped and somehow there's an interception, so be it. We'll survive in advance. We're going to make the postseason. You starting to get into the conference championship games and you get in the Super Bowl when you're relying on somebody to be perfect. And Joe Burrow has brought up the fact that he feels like he has to be perfect to win. I just think it lends itself to the chance that there's a high likelihood that that's not going to happen. So what can you rely on? And more times than not, these championship teams can rely on just ugly, control the line of scrimmage, be able to stop the other team from more or less being able to run away with games, keeping themselves in the game long enough to where they can let the other team lose it. Right. And that's what it seems like the NFL is more about, not losing the game than to actually winning the game. And Bill Belichick, now that he's doing all these media things and he's on podcasts and stuff, you never would have gotten this out of them before. But he's even said, or you've heard his players say, the last thing that Bill Belichick would say to his team before they ever made the field was, you can't win the game before you don't lose it. Right. So if one of the greatest of all time is telling his team, the last thing he tells them before they go out there is that you can't win the game before you don't lose it, then that mindset has to be one of the main ingredients of a championship team, which is, hey, I know on 3rd and 17, we probably want to go make this play, right? I know Lamar, if you want to get on Lamar at all, and I thought he played unbelievable well. It's
He
that
played fine. He played well.
He played very well.
Not unbelievably well. He played well.
I agree with that. But I would say if you want to get on Lamar about something, it's like, hey, I know during the regular season you're probably going to maybe be able to fit that ball down the sideline between the safety and that DB. But when it's this cold outside and the chances of you completing that pass are incredibly low regardless, and we don't need you to make that pass, that's the difference between, in my opinion, what some elite quarterbacks have decided to do. And that's why Tom Brady was so successful. And I downplayed Tom Brady, and you know this for a long time, because of his athleticism. I thought this dude just throws 5-yard hitches, throws slants, and then he relies on his defense, basically, quite frankly, to control the game, and then they find a way to win it in the end. Tom Brady was just calculated. He decided, you know what, I'm not going to put the ball in harm's way, and we're going to find a way to win in the end. And that's what the NFL is about, and that's what's going to happen this weekend.
My first day working for you, you showed me Tom Brady highlights, and they were just like crossing routes, and I was like, "What do we do? We belittling Tom Brady?" But you're right. You can't lose game. Everyone all week, and I know you text us and everything about the bad calls in the Chiefs Texans game. The Texans didn't lose that game because of refs. The Texans lost that game because they missed 2 field goals. Because they played bad. The first opening kickoff gets returned to the 30-yard line. They have terrible punts. They lost that game because they had terrible special teams play. That's why they lost the game, and that's what good teams never do.
Correct.
The
only thing that I rebuttal on that is that at some point, though, it does feel like the Chiefs always get the benefit of the doubt of calls that seemingly are very important in a game. And I'm not saying that that's the reason they won. No way am I suggesting that the only way the Chiefs make the Super Bowl every single season, what seems like ad nauseum, is because of the refs. Right. What I am saying is that there are, without question, questionable calls that benefit them at very critical times that always seemingly gives them an out. And again, the Bengals game, that when we were down there for the AFC Championship game, and some people, if Chiefs fans seen this, they'd think that I'm some Bengals homer, which is hilarious on the internet. But my point is that you don't get called for a block in the bat that seems obvious on a punt. That's a 10-yard penalty from where the punt was caught. That's a big deal. Instead of starting at the 50, you're starting on your own 20. And then all of a sudden they march down the field, yes. And then all of a sudden, Mahomes does what he does because he gets away with it. It's just like your kids. If you take them to the store every single time and they ask for a pop in the checkout line every single time and you get them that pop, on the 5th time when you tell them they're not allowed to get the pop, they're going to throw an absolute fit because they always get the pop. They expect it. If there wasn't ever a more telling thing in the NFL, it's when Patrick Mahomes flopped like a fish, didn't get touched at all when he was on the white the other day, and then acted as if he got hit and looked back at the ref. It's because he knows he gets away with that. Right. And that's the problem that I have. When you watch a league where guys are getting hit in the face at the end of the games, again, there's a 2-point conversion that you could argue that would have gotten the Bengals in the postseason if they win that game. Gets hit directly in the face. Somehow, and you could give me the whole BS answer that, well, some quarterbacks have earned that right. The rules are the rules. The rules are the rules. I don't give a damn if Jake Browning or John Kitna get hit in the face.
No John Kitna slander.
And I wasn't slandering. Or Burrow or Mahomes or Rodgers, they get hit in the face, they should get the penalty. No. But then you add in the fact that it's still Joe Burrow that gets hit in the face. How is he not getting a penalty? That, to me, I have a real problem with. The analogy I used earlier, and the same thing I'm going to continue to use with the Kansas City Chiefs, and why I have you know what's sad is I have a disdain for them because it feels like they get the benefit of the doubt, and that has made them the villain for me, is it feels like Tiger Woods is basically down a stroke with 5 holes to play, and some referee comes out of the woods and says, you know what? There was a penalty over there. The game's now tied. There's 5 holes left, so anybody can win. And then all of a sudden, Tiger wins by 1 stroke, and then nobody remembers 5 holes ago they gave him a penalty. I know that that's a terrible analogy, but you already have a great team with an elite quarterback. I don't want them getting the benefit of the doubt on anything. I don't think you can say they've earned it. That's not the way that I look at the NFL. The rules are the rules. And if you're going to call roughing the passer, then you better damn near call it on every single other quarterback in the league too. And we all know for damn certain that Patrick Mahomes has gotten the benefit of the doubt. Joe Mixon said it best. We all see what's going on when you come in and you have to play here. Doesn't mean that you can't win in Kansas City. Doesn't mean that at all. In fact, the Bengals proved that you could. They came back from whatever it was, 24-3. The truth is, though, is that you almost have to be perfect because you're playing a good team, and if they get the benefit of the doubt on 1 or 2 calls, it makes them damn near impossible to beat. So, no, I'm not suggesting they only won because of the penalty, but when you get a call on 3rd and 12 and you extend the drive and that leads to a field goal and momentum, it matters. And yes, the Texans did it to themselves. They didn't win the game. They didn't make winning plays. So I'm not suggesting the Chiefs somehow got the game given to them. But I really do hope when we watch these conference championships that the game is just called in a way that seems unbiased. And we'll find out if that happens. And I hope that it does, because I hate to be a conspiracy theorist. But it does seem damn near impossible that every single time the Chiefs get a chance to have a benefit of a call go their way, they get it. And maybe I'm being blind. Maybe I have bias. But I'm tired of seeing it.
The one thing I'll say, and I think we've done they've done the Chiefs refs thing every day on the show this week, so I think the chat wants us to get off this. The final thing I'll say, though, before we move on, because I want to hear about your Reds experience yesterday, is the conspiracy theory thing seems silly to me because the NFL isn't some company. There isn't some guy like making money at the top. It's a union of the 32 teams. Like, the owners are the NFL. Like, it's 32 owners, and then they hire one guy to run the ship, and that's Roger Goodell. So for them to, like, sign off on, hey, we're gonna have the Chiefs win every Super Bowl, we're gonna cheat to have the Chiefs win, seems a little silly, because why would the other teams do that? And you could say, well, Roger Goodell's the one pulling the strings, but the NFL at the end of the day is a union of 32 franchise owners, and I don't think that they're going to be like, I think we should, like if you're the Bills, why are you gonna be like, yeah, we're gonna take the fall to the Chiefs 4 straight times in the postseason? I don't think that's gonna play. But yesterday you had a cool experience. You went to Reds Media Day, which is where the off the bench people were at. I don't know what the official was.
Yeah, I think the thing that I got invited by one of our sponsors to go with them to a corporate event. So the cool thing was that it wasn't really. I don't think that the players knew that I would. In fact, I will say this: the players didn't really know who anybody was. There was one player that has played in the league for quite some time that somehow knew who I was and in Chatterbox in general. And he had mentioned that he's just a big baseball fan, which is why he knew. But the cool thing about it is that I think he shared to me a lot of insight into the way that some of the players feel about the way that the game has gone down and where it's headed. And I guess ultimately it's made me starting to think through the league as a whole and what happens with Major League Baseball. Because I think that there's a lot of people that love baseball that still have a place in its heart for it. It's just that they have come to the realization at some point that they feel as if they're fighting an uphill battle within the fandom that they currently have. And I'm not suggesting for a single second that there should be pessimism when it comes to this upcoming season, but let's face the facts that are Major League Baseball as a whole. There are complete, discrepancies between small market and major market teams. And the question ultimately comes down to is whose fault is that? My thought on all of this is, simply put, you play by the rules that you're given. You shouldn't be discriminated for going out and trying to put your team or your organization in the best chance to possibly be successful ever, under any circumstance. And the Dodgers have done that. And they've done it to such a high level of a degree that you now, I believe, have people starting to question whether or not this is something that's sustainable. And people have been beating this drum for 5, 6, 7, 8 years now that it's probably not sustainable over the long haul. But similar to what some have said, let's do what's best for the game, that's not what's best for the players' pocketbooks. So you find yourself in a tough position, I think, as a player. And what I think over the conversation I had was essentially Major League Baseball at one point, and I think the game that some of us grew up loving, was a little more art. It was a little more art than just execution in regards to just being a strict hardline thing that this is what it is. And the guy was, I don't keep referencing as the guy, but the guy was talking about how analytics are one part of the equation. It's not the whole part. The other part is the fact that you have ABS and or whatever you want to call it, the strike zone in general,
right,
has made it to where there's only one type of pitcher nowadays that's going to be able to have success when it comes to the strike zone. And when the strike zone is smaller, right, it would lead you and tend you to believe that ultimately the advantage would go to the hitter. And I mean, we all would agree, right, that the smaller you make the strike zone, the hitter should have more success, yeah? But the way that it was presented yesterday was kind of a unique way of looking at this, is that pitchers with less velocity were much more apt to being able to be successful because they could earn a certain part of the zone as a strike, yeah?
Rules are rules.
I'm just saying
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
That is what they considered
Right.
as a pitcher. I can find a way to convince this umpire that if I hit this spot for long enough,
correct,
it'll be a strike.
Correct.
Greg Maddux is probably the perfect example of that.
Right.
But what's happened is you have a strike zone that is very rigid, and players have decided that the only way they can continually get guys out, depending on, it doesn't matter the health of their arm, it doesn't matter anything other than just straight velocity. And what that's led to is guys focusing directly on velocity rather than just trying to have the art of pitching. And that has then led into the idea of being able to maximize your potential over a short span of time versus trying to actually, what I would consider, I guess, becoming a long-term pitcher based off of being savvy. And that was their perception of it all. I'm not saying that's the right thing. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just think that they feel like that's the reason that pitching has become what it is because many of the guys in the league feel like if you're not throwing 95 plus, with the way the strike zone is, you're not going to be able to be successful.
Well, it's for a long time. It's like height in basketball. Velocity equaled easier path to success in baseball as a pitcher. Like, yeah, you could make it as Greg Maddux throwing 88 to 90, but if you threw 96, you had a much easier path to. You didn't have to be as artistic. I had this conversation with somebody about baseball in as an art and everything like that, and why it feels like it has changed so much, because it has. When analytics and not bunting, but shifts and pitchers throwing one, that's a big thing now too.
Yeah, one pitch.
You learn, hey, I've got an elite slider, I've got a mediocre fastball. I'm throwing my slider 90% of the time. All of that came into the game because it was successful. It was how you won. It was a better way to play. It was a better way to win the game.
Yeah.
In the same, we're seeing this in basketball too. The reason that you watch an NBA game and they're just chucking up threes all the time is because that's how you win the game, right? 3 points is worth more than 2. That's simple math.
Yep.
The reason that we see analytics, guys that get on base, guys that shift to one side of the field, guys that throw nothing but sliders, is because it's how you won games. It was a competitive advantage. Never along the way did we ask the question, hey, this is entertainment?
Exactly.
This is entertainment? Yeah, that's how you win the game, and I get it. This is a competitive sport. That's how you're supposed to win it. But you never ask the thing like, this isn't a whole lot of fun to watch. This isn't a whole lot of fun. The people that pay our bills, this isn't a whole lot of fun for them. And that's where you're having to see the MLB kind of step in and go, all right, we've got to make this more fun. We've got to make this, and everyone can bang the table. That's not baseball. That's not baseball. Well, if we don't step in, we're going to see the game evolve to what wins competitively, not what's more fun to watch. And I'm in favor of, hey, let's do things that are more fun to watch. You know what's fun to watch? Pitchers going 8 innings. The reason pitchers don't go 8 innings anymore, 8, 9 innings, is because when they get to innings 7, 8, and 9, they're not very good. You can bring in a relief pitcher that's going to throw 99 to 100 that's more likely to get the outs than your starting pitcher. That's the reason we don't do it anymore. It's not because there's some conspiracy that, hey, the analytics, this is what the kids want. No, that's how you win games. And it's not fun to watch.
And I think that everything that you just laid out is exactly really where Rob Manfred finds himself. And I know people have given him a significant amount of criticism, probably rightfully so. But my thing would be, instead of focusing on so much from Rod Manfred's spot, that is, how can we make the game more enjoyable to watch? It is going to get superseded by, there are only so many teams that have the capability of being competitive that you're going to lose a certain population of fans in a lot of different cities. And although, yes, I know that if you added up Pittsburgh, you added up Cincinnati, you added up Kansas City, and let's say you added up Tampa, those 4 franchises probably still fail or have less fans than the New York Yankees.
Right.
So maybe from an overall global view of it, you're saying, well, really, I can't say this out loud, but, you know, if the Cubs, the Mets, the Dodgers, the Yankees, yeah, I'm sure I'm missing a couple, but if they're relevant and they're good, this league's fine. We got plenty of fans that watch from just those 5 teams. And I would say that you're missing the bigger picture. And I would hope, and my hope is that instead of worrying about the rules and the time and all of these things that very much need addressed.
Yeah, you got to artificially create the game the way it once was.
We have to get back to, there wouldn't be as much complaining if it was and again, I get it's hard to do. I get that the Major League Baseball Players Association is the strongest union in the history of unions, but you're going to have to get back to a point where everybody on opening day feels like they have a real chance, which is the reason the NFL is successful. You can say that it was made for TV. You can tell me that people just like football more. And you know what? That may be slightly true in certain aspects, but that if you're the leader of Major League Baseball and you're Rob Manfred, you cannot go about your business with a second-class natured feeling. You can't look at it like, well, we're just never going to be the NFL because we're not football. Like, it's a different sport. They like football more. You've got to find a way to recreate the things that the NFL has done really, really well and put them within your sport and hope that that helps generate more and more eyeballs. Because we all know that baseball's regional, but at one time it wasn't regional. And I get that maybe there's more entertainment options than ever. I'm well aware of that. And maybe back in the 1950s, you really didn't have much of a choice, but besides watch the 5 channels that were on your TV, and baseball just happened to be one of them. And that's the reason that Major League Baseball at that time was a national game. But the main thing that many people are going to become very disinterested in when it comes to Major League Baseball, and it's by far the biggest problem, is the inadequacies of each individual franchise. And what you're going to find yourself in an argument with is this. And they all have valid points. There's 3 of them. You have the players themselves, you have the big market owners, and you have the small market owners. And you have to ask yourself, what do each of those have that is a pro and a con? The players have every bit to sit there and say they are worth whatever someone's willing to pay them, because this is America, and that is 100% true. That's the way that this country is ran, and there's nothing wrong with that. The small market teams are then going to come in and say, well, the truth is that we have to run this like a somewhat of a sustainable business. And I'm not here to defend the Castellinis, but they have said we run this like a nonprofit. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. I'm not here to argue that. But if let's just say that is the best case scenario that a small market fan base could hope from their ownership group, is that they don't make any money. Whatever comes in, they put back into the product. The problem lies is that if you did that in the NFL, and if you do that in Major League Baseball, you're going to have some people who have billions of dollars to spend, as we know, and some that only have millions. And at some point, just like capitalism that we find ourselves in this country, which again, I'm pro-capitalism, but my point is that this is a product that is entertainment first. It's entertainment first. And the truth is that they've got to find a way to get back to making it to where it is entertaining for every single team in this league. And yes, there's going to be some teams that are like the Browns and the Jets that can never figure it out, and they're dysfunctional and they don't know how to find ways to be successful. But if they want to find a way back to relevancy nationally, and they'll always have a stakehold, it's Major League Baseball. But if they want to become a national game, they're going to have to make it to where the talent that exists in 4 or 5 cities is spread out through the entire league. And you have real storylines each and every year about who's going to have to go where and what you're going to have to do this offseason because you only have X amount of dollars to spend. The salary cap is the only way. It's the only way that Major League Baseball becomes nationally relevant again. And if the players don't want to hear that, that's fine. But I'm telling you right now that we have to find a way to compensate the players fairly. But more importantly, make the game as a whole fair. Otherwise, I'm here to tell you, if you want to say as a player that you care about the game and you love the game and you want to farther this game, there is no better sacrifice that they could make than to find a way to try to make baseball fair again for all clubs. And they might have to take a little bit of a hit, yes. I get it. The players are going to have to take a little bit of a hit. But I got news for you. There will not be, you can mark this down now, and I will guarantee it, there will not be a season the next time there's a CBA in 2026. There will not be one. Because the only way to save Major League Baseball is for the small ownerships groups to rally together and say they're not doing it. It's the only leverage they have. Because the truth is that Major League Baseball has entered the era now. And I'm not suggesting that the Dodgers are to blame. They're not. They're doing what's best for them. And I'm not suggesting that Cohen with the Mets is to blame because they're doing what's best for them. They're abiding by the rules. But the truth is that this is going to be treated like a hobby, and that's what it is for some organizations. If this is treated like if you go to a guy that's got a lot of money and they're like, "Hey, do you want to check out my cars?" And you're like, "Yeah, sure." And then they open up their garage and they got 50 cars in their garage, and you're like, "Wow, this is a pretty big hobby. My hobby's riding a bike." Your hobby just so happens to be having $4 or $5 million worth of cars because you have that luxury. We have found ourselves now in professional sports with Major League Baseball where this is a hobby for some. And I'm not saying that that's their problem, but it's Major League Baseball's problem. And they better get damn to fixing it fast. Because if they don't, there's going to be entire generations of youth that, quite frankly, aren't going to watch the sport because the team that they love never are relevant. Never are relevant. It's going to be hard to convince my kids, and certainly their kids, to watch the Reds on a daily basis when you're projected to win 77 games every single season, and you turn around and you watch the same other organizations and they're projected to win 105. Not because they can scout better, not because they have a young prospect system that comes up, but because what they're capable of doing is saying, you know what, the Reds, they went out and found a kid at 18 years old named Ellie De La Cruz that nobody ever wanted, and they gave him $40,000. He ended up being a world superstar. He kind of got his feet wet in the big leagues at the beginning of his career. Was a pretty decent player, you know. I mean, fringe all-star type player. His last year or two with the Reds, all-star, maybe a superstar per se. But then you know what? During the prime of his career, we get to have him. And if you don't think that's a problem, then I would say you're missing the whole point of what it is to be a fan. The same reason people don't really love college basketball the way they used to love it because you can't follow a kid when he starts as a freshman and you see him finish as a senior is the same problem that Major League Baseball is going to have when the smaller organizations have zero chance. And I don't mean a little bit chance. I don't mean 0.001. I mean 0.00% chance to sign their superstars to a long-term deal. When the Pirates don't even consider trying to give Paul Skeens a big contract, when the Reds virtually have no chance of keeping Ellie De La Cruz, you have to ask yourself, what's the point? Why are we doing this? And that's not my problem to figure out. It's Rob Manfred's problem to figure out in Major League Baseball. And if there's not a season come 2026, you can point directly to that as to why. And we'll see what ends up happening. But don't be shocked when it happens. A whole season gone. Because the small ownership group has one thing that they can hold on to as leverage, and that would be it.
The only thing that I agree with you wholeheartedly about everything. They need to be salary cap. They need to do all that stuff because the way that we're going is unsustainable. It's really interesting that the Reds, the Cubs, a lot of ownership groups have come out and said that they make no profit, that they literally just try to break even, which is quite honestly how most companies work. They just keep increasing their valuation. They don't actually make a profit. They're just like, hey, we're worth this much now. The only way in which I think that we will actually see change is the Dodgers creating a dynasty. Because to this point, the one thing that has always curbed Major League Baseball is that Major League Baseball has had the most different number of champions over the last 20 years than every other professional sport because the sport itself is random.
Correct.
Because the sport itself is random. When we see that gone, which it might happen, we might see like the Dodgers stack up a roster so great that even the randomness of baseball can't beat it, to where the Dodgers sweep every series in the postseason. They win 130 games. Even the randomness of baseball loses. That's when the game will change. And I don't know if we'll see it, because we've seen great teams. We've seen the Yankees stack up on teams in the mid-2000s and don't get a championship because of it. Yeah. We've seen the Dodgers, like, they make the postseason every year, but they've won what? One championship last year and a Mickey Mouse one in 2020 in the last 40 years. The only way that we'll actually see change is when the randomness of baseball loses out.
That's fine. And Craig brings up a good point. He says salary cap is never happening, and that's fine, because there was a lot of people that said Sears was never going to go out of business. Blockbuster had no chance of going out of business. Could you imagine telling your great-grandfathers that Major League Baseball would be arguably, maybe at one time, the third most popular sport in this country? I think they'd probably laugh at you. See, the thing is that when you look at life finite within a window of opportunity of maybe 1 year or 2 years, it's really hard to see the change. When you step back and you think 20 years from now, what does this look like? It becomes a little less clear. And all I'm saying is that as someone who is a part of an organization that talks sports, started up a company that quite literally this is what we do, and you have a relatively successful show that we do in Chatterbox Reds, and I find myself more worried about whether or not it's not the job that we're going to do. I'm not worried about whether or not that Craig, Nick, and myself can do a good job of doing a podcast. I'm more worried about whether or not there's a fan base of fans that are going to continue to be interested in something that might eventually show that it's got zero chance or close to a zero chance of happening. So what you're going to start getting is more and more bandwagon fans, which is fine. I'm not gatekeeping of how you want to be a fan. But the truth is that at some point, you can't invest this much time into something that seems like it's an impossible task to get to. And that's the worry that I have. Because the truth is at one time there was a salary cap in Major League Baseball. It just was called economics. You couldn't spend this much money because if you did, you were going to lose a bunch of money because you didn't bring in enough revenue. And you know what? The randomness of baseball was big enough because you couldn't get a good enough team to eliminate the randomness of baseball. So we just kind of hung our hat on the idea of, you know what? I know the Yankees got this guy. I know the Dodgers got this guy. But if you look at their WAR and you take in the actual real statistics of them, I know they're not a superstar, but we can replace them with a platoon player that's somewhat similar to this. Well, what's happened over the course of the last few years is the same teams that got an edge because they were trying to be smarter than everybody and use the analytics to their advantage. Well, guess what? The haves figured that out too. And they decided, you know what? We'll do the same thing, but we're just going to spend more money so we have the better platoon if there is one. Or we're going to have the better player here if there is one. And we've come to realize that this is what wins games as well. So the winning the games became a priority. And on top of that, in the last couple of years, a hobby mentality has taken over a few organizations that seemingly has no end. The money seemingly has no end. The truth is that we could all be like the Cubs, for instance, in the division of the Central. We know, and you're a Cubs fan, the Cubs, if they were to sign Jason Hayward to a major deal and he's not as good as they signed him to be, that hamstrings the Cubs just enough to where they kind of got their extra shot at it and they missed, so they're just like the rest of us now. And you could say, well, the same case could be said about the Dodgers and the Yankees at one time. They might get a couple extra shots at the goal, but it's only a couple. And if they miss, they're just like the rest of us. And we have a chance to beat them just as well as they have a chance to beat us. You add in the randomness of baseball over a 5-game series, or hell, even a 3-game series now, and a 7-game series, there's a chance you can get hot and make a run. And that's what we've always argued. We've always been like, you know what, just get in the playoffs. You got a chance.
It's the randomness of baseball.
But the problem is starting to showcase. And if we're going to sit here and just act like it's not a big deal and we're going to be able to brush it aside, that's how Sears goes out of business. That's how Blockbuster goes out of business. Is because at some point you think you're so damn big, no one could possibly take away what is this. And that is what's that's how I feel the way I feel. And again, this is my opinion. I'm not suggesting that I want this to happen. I just look at it all and I think to myself, that is the road Major League Baseball is headed down. And this isn't like a fast thing. This is something we've all slowly seen over time. And at some point, someone's going to have to do something about it. Because if the Dodgers are capable of quite literally spending whatever they want, that's not their problem. I'm not suggesting that it is. But it's the rest of our problem. And if they're capable of dominating a league, and let's just also face the fact that in Cincinnati, we're very fortunate as fans. Because if we were Rockies fans, we'd have no chance. We'd have zero chance. The only saving grace that we have in the Central, and I'm not saying this to take a shot at you, I'm just saying that is that the Cubs don't do that. That you could argue the Cubs have a chance to find somebody like that. And if they do find someone like that, then guess what? This song and dance is over. Because if the Cubs were to do that, and they were projected to win 103 games, that's what the Dodgers are projected to win. That's their over-under. You want to bet on the Dodgers over? They got to win 104 baseball games for you to win. Meanwhile, you look at the Central, and they all basically outside of the Cubs have to win 81 games, 82 games. I think the Reds and the Cardinals are at 78. This isn't a knock on you being excited for the season. I'm not suggesting that I think, it's completely gone. I'm just saying, let's not be naive. The alarm should be sounding as loud as humanly possible that what's going on right now is not sustainable. And maybe it's not sustainable to spend the way the Dodgers have spent. But I don't know if you know this or not, but there's a lot of people that have an absolute boatload of money. You look around the NIL of college football and we laugh and we're like, oh man, how are these guys getting paid $12 million? You know why? Because there's billionaires out there that care about college football and they don't give a rat's tail about $12 million. It doesn't mean nothing. The next time you give $1 to somebody because they need $1 to help pay for a parking spot or something, I want you to think about that interaction that you have, and that's the same type of interaction that these billionaires are going to have when it comes to signing the top reliever. How much does it cost? What, $14 million a year? All right. You think it'll help us win? Yeah. All right. Well, there's $14 million because we don't care. It's irrelevant. That's not always been the case in Major League Baseball. At some point, you had a salary cap because they treated it as a business. That is gone. And again, I'm not rooting for it. But if we're going to sit around and act like the Dodgers and what they're doing isn't clearly obvious a major problem, then I don't know what is. So, I'm still excited for the season.
You went 30. I think that final take was about 30 minutes long.
Well, yeah.
I think
as
I
good as I
chimed in
once
for
was.
another minute.
What's the Toby Keith song?
I ain't as good as I once was, but I was good once as I ever was.
That's right, and that's what I got. So that'll be me. That's what I got for the next 6 months. I'll be back on Off the Bench in next January.
It is nice to like chime in every 2 months. You just get to rattle off all your takes, and then you just get to leave. You're like, man, I could do that every day. And then you do it like day 2, and you're like, I'm out of stuff to talk about. Right. We did that yesterday.
Yeah, you got to give props to people that do it every day.
Correct.
Sure.
Yeah, it's you made a lot of good points there, and all I'll say is I think as baseball fans, we've got to cut some slack to Rob Manfred. I know this is going to be an unpopular take. We got to cut some slack to Rob Manfred because he's actively trying to change the game to make it more enjoyable for everyone. So maybe don't get pissed at every single move that he wants to do, even though it might sound silly. He's just doing what he can. He's probably the most proactive owner up against the tallest task, or commissioner up against the tallest task in all of sports. So Rob Manfred, there's going to be change at some point, and we'll see what it comes to. But any final thoughts before you? It was fun doing this today.
It was enjoyable to do this again. Obviously, we'd like to do more of this, but the reality is that the situation is at some point we'll see where the chips fall where they may. But there's a lot of moving parts. We got to do what's been in the best interest of a lot of things. And I know that this show is very important to many. I get that we want to make it as good as we can. Yes, we also need to find ways in which we can utilize other avenues of what we're all passionate about. So doing a show after every Reds game is a good amount of work in and of itself. But then more importantly, there's other things that I'd like to try to do within underneath our umbrella that require time, effort, and energy. I know a lot of people give Kenner a hard time.
Kenner does a great job.
But Kenner does a good job for what basically we're capable of offering. And it's a matter of trying to keep what we have. I don't want to say alive because I don't make it like it's dead, but the goal is at some point to get the band back together when things are rolling and do the best we can at Chatterbox, which is what we are, small business, trying to make it each and every single day. That means I need to thank you all. I don't see you as much as I used to, but many of you are loyal as you could possibly be, and we appreciate that. Members, thank you very much. I'm actually going to do a members-only stream later. I know I've not done golf a ton, but we'll see. I'll probably choke. And if I can be honest, Reid, I thought about not doing this. I thought about not live streaming it for members just because I didn't want to put more pressure on myself or something like that. But I am 2 strokes behind to winning a golf tournament. So I'll probably do that later today and choke.
Nice.
We'll choke and not win, but maybe we will win. So 3 under. The leader is at 6 under, and they're finished. So I have a full round. I would tie them obviously if I played the same way I played the first.
I don't know if Fergie Fowler's watching, but is there money involved in this whole tournament? Like you got to.
There is not money. No, there is not money. I was thinking about ways in which you could do that, but then it becomes a muddy mess of when you put money into a computer, and people probably don't trust whether or not you're actually you're hacking into a way to be able to make golf shots. It's like
my freshman year roommate in college would get on these websites that you could play people on Madden and games like that, and you throw $20 in and you'd bet if you beat them in Madden and stuff like that. And I remember this was 2014, and I remember just thinking, I was like, this is crazy, this is insane. So I imagine there's got to be some legitimate ways to do that.
Yeah.
But good luck in your tournament.
Yeah, so I'm gonna play today. I don't know, maybe spam the chat right now if you're a member of what time's best, because the problem is I just don't know what time's best. And the best time to probably play, if we're being honest, is at 9 o'clock at night, right? You're getting ready to go to bed, you find something to do. Right. The issue with that is that the golf actually makes noise, and
your kids are sleeping.
Yeah, you can't be pounding golf balls in a garage when kids are trying to go to bed. So it needs to be a little bit earlier in the day, but we'll see. I'm gonna try to win a tournament. I think I have a chance, and but it's been fun. It's been an honor. It's been a privilege. Went in overtime. Who knew?
We did good overtime. I believe there's going to be Chatterbox Bearcats going to be redirected after this stream. So thank you all for being here today. I'll be producing tomorrow. Casey's going to be out, so I'll be with you guys tomorrow. It'll be me, Jacob, and Kenner. No Ellie Rue, but we'll see you guys later. Trace, sign us out.
All right, I'll be live trying to win a golf tournament at what appears to be 3 o'clock, based off the one suggestion I got. So 3 o'clock. Gonna win a golf tournament. The gang, they'll take you back better than ever tomorrow. It was an honor. It was a privilege. Hope you enjoyed the show. See everybody.